Chapter 742. Besides, even if it had a deterrent effect, if the opponent chosen was too weak, the effect would be limited. Summon all divisions and commanders for a military meeting. After issuing an order to Beta Persei, Yang Chendong walked straight to the newly built military building in the city. It didn't take long for the grassland to erupt into an uproar. 2 consecutive news broke the peace of the grassland in summer. The first news was that the beginning city had begun to open up wasteland nearby. Although the season was not right, it was obvious that they were preparing to plant crops next year. It was said that there were hundreds of thousands of acres of fertile land. This was naturally not much in the Central Plains, but on the grassland, where war could break out at any time, this courage seemed a little big. Some of the powers were still wondering why the mercenaries were so daring. Were they not afraid that after planting the seeds, they would be robbed when it was time for the harvest? Just as this thought was still echoing in the minds of some of the leaders of the surrounding forces, the second news came. In view of the fact that the Mabe Mongolians had instigated Yukasai of the Golden Family to come to the beginning city to cause trouble, the mercenaries decided to fight back to shock the people. In other words, the mercenaries were going to choose the Mabe Mongolians as their opponent. The news had just been spread out, and some people were still confirming the authenticity of the news. The mercenary army had already gathered and went straight out of the city to the Jianghu area of Mabe Mongolian. As if to strengthen the deterrent effect, this time, Yang Chendong personally led the troops. The troops were 5,200 people from the 3rd Division of the Cold Front, 3,000 people from the Jurchen Cavalry Regiment, 3,000 people from the Tatar Cavalry Regiment, and 3,200 people from the Reinforced Cavalry Regiment. A total of nearly 15,000 cavalry went out of the city. Tiger's Main's Independent Regiment, the 2nd Reinforced Cavalry Regiment, and the Logistics Regiment were left in the city. There were more than 10,000 people in total. Even if the enemy attacked, it was absolutely no problem to defend the beginning city for a certain period of time. The army exited the city. The mighty cavalry marched for several hours before exiting the city from the north and east gates. Then, they gathered at one place outside the city and headed straight for Jianghu in a seemingly mighty manner. From the first city to the Jianghu area, one of the places that couldn't be bypassed was the Tatar-controlled Yandu city, which was also known as the Lingji Spring in the future. General Mu Ren, who was guarding the city, was terrified when he heard the news that 15,000 mercenaries were approaching. As a powerful local force, Mu Ren had 3,000 cavalrymen and 2,000 infantrymen. Speaking of which, Wanda's city wasn't very big, nor was it flourishing. In fact, it was extremely poor. These soldiers were more than enough to protect themselves, but when faced with a mercenary army of 15,000 cavalrymen, he didn't have the slightest bit of confidence. Previously, Aga Dorji also belonged to the Tatar faction, and he had 50,000 cavalrymen. But wasn't he still defeated by the mercenaries? Now that they were facing each other, would they have a good ending? Was it possible to win? Mu Ren had no confidence at all. He had no choice but to cooperate with the mercenaries. Especially when he heard that one of his old friends was a senior general of the mercenaries, he immediately sent his own messenger to find the commander of the Tatar Cavalry Regiment, Su He, and wanted to find out what was going on. Mu Ren sent a messenger, but Su He didn't choose to meet him at the first time. Instead, he called Hasegashan, the commander of the regiment, and asked him to keep an eye on Mu Ren. Then he personally went to see Yang Chendong to inform the 6th young master of the matter. Su He was originally a defeated general, but because of his outstanding ability, he was favored by Yang Chendong. For him, Yang Chendong also let go of the enemy, Aga Dorji's son, Hiroachu. It could be said that he gave him enough face, so he offered his loyalty. This time, he told Yang Chendong about the matter, which was a way to express his attitude. Knowing that Mu Ren wanted to cooperate with him, Yang Chendong said to Su He with a smile on his face, "You can tell them that we don't intend to do anything to Wandu, but they also have to abide by their duty. Don't think of attacking the first city. Also, about Mabe Mongolia, they have to tell us as much as they know. If they are not sincere enough, then we may kill them together." Yang Chendong had the confidence to say such words. In his opinion, it was not a big deal. With 15,000 elite cavalrymen in his hand, a small city with only 5,000 soldiers was really not a big deal. Su-he took the order and went to see the messenger sent by Mu-ren. He conveyed the order of the 6th young master, and the messenger left in a daze. What was enough sincerity? Not only he couldn't explain it clearly, but Mu-ren himself also didn't understand it after hearing this answer. Forget it, don't think so much. Immediately send someone to write down all the information we know about Mabe Mongolia and give it all to the mercenaries. Mu-ren couldn't understand this sentence, but what he had to do was to do his best. If this couldn't satisfy the mercenaries, then they could only fight. He could only accept his fate. Hand it all over? Don't we need to keep some? Once the Mongolians of the Gobi Desert are heavily injured by the mercenaries, then our existence will become a real threat. The messenger reminded in a low voice. If we don't hand it all over, I'm afraid we can't survive this. Mu-ren shook his head as if he had made some kind of decision. Then he looked at the messenger and said, "Okay, go and do it now." They were all Mongolians in the grassland, so Mu-ren did collect a lot of information about Mabe Mongolia. Previously, he just wanted to protect himself. He was worried that the mercenaries would attack him, but he didn't expect that one day the information could be used to please the mercenaries and protect himself. After the news was summarized, the messenger worked hard again and sent it to Commander Su-he. Finally, it was placed in front of Yang Chendong. Looking at the pile of information that was more than half a person high, Yang Chendong laughed and said, "Yes, it seems that this Mu-ren is still very sensible. That's the case, inform the vanguard leader, Yella, to bypass Mabe city and go straight to Jianghu." Yang Chendong knew that for so many years in the chaotic grassland, there were many different forces, and he couldn't solve all of them by himself. Since he couldn't do it for the time being, he had to set a benchmark, and that was to solve those hostile forces first. Mabe city was so close to the first city. If he could make them stay, it was equivalent to telling others that as long as they were honest, everyone could live in peace. Wasn't that an example? As for the Mabe Mongolia, they must be solved. Although it was very difficult to achieve the result of eliminating them, and it might not be possible with this little force, but it was necessary to severely injure the opponent. If he didn't do so, it would not be enough to intimidate others and not be able to establish his prestige. This time, he brought out cavalry, and the logistics team didn't follow him. The soldiers of the army each prepared dry food for 20 days. In other words, unless they could snatch a large amount of the enemy's food, they could only last for about 20 days. If they didn't succeed, they would have to return. This was also a habit of the Mongolian cavalry, or a helplessness due to the constraints of the environment. Without supplies, the logistics couldn't keep up. Who knew how many ambitious people would end up wasting their time on this matter? However, it was also because of this that the distance between each tribe was relatively far, forming a natural safe distance between each other. Just like the information sent by Mu-ren said, the entire Mabe Mongolia existed in the form of scattered tribes, and the farthest distance between their tribes was nearly 2,000 miles. That was to say, no matter how hard Yang Chendong tried, he couldn't run through the entire Mabe Mongolia's territory this time. Even if he couldn't go all the way, he would choose the key place to attack. Looking at the information sent by Mu-ren and comparing it with the map, Yang Chendong focused his attack on the area west of Inma River. Inma River was like a natural moat, established naturally. And in the north of it, there were many Mabe Mongolian tribes, such as Sanfeng Mountain and the Three Gorges Mouth, Kanhali village. But crossing the river to attack was originally a military taboo. It was equal to cutting off one's own retreat and fighting with the enemy. This wasn't what Yang Chendong wanted to see, and in the current situation, he didn't need to take such a risk. It was better for him to stop there, and then continue to exert pressure on the Mabe Mongolian tribes in the area south of Inma River, forcing them to take the initiative to attack him. This was equal to turning passivity into initiative, and as long as the mercenaries made a big enough noise in the Jianghu area, he wouldn't worry about the Mabe Mongolian tribes not being fooled and not coming to find him. At that time, he could wait for the enemy to be exhausted and fight with them. After making up his mind, the mercenaries were like a flying arrow, passing by the edge of the city and rushing straight to the Inma River area. Mabe Mongolian tribes. They had already known about the mercenary army's sudden invasion before the army had even arrived at Wanda City. After so many years of operation, it could be said that their scouts were everywhere. The mercenaries didn't mean to hide their tracks, so the news came immediately. The moment Khan received the news, he was so angry that his eyes widened and his beard blew. The mercenaries are so arrogant and infuriating. It was no wonder that Suitor would say that. He was the Khan of Gobi Mongol. He represented a powerful Mongol force. Most people were afraid that he would cause trouble for them. Who would take the initiative to provoke them? Not to mention that Wuxia was not a member of his tribe. He was an emissary of the Golden Horde, a member of the Golden Horde. What did their actions have to do with him? Head Suitor was very angry. He thought that the mercenaries were looking down on him. He thought that they didn't dare to provoke the Golden family, so they targeted him. What? Do you really think that you can look down on us just because you defeated us in the Battle of the Dwarf Rock? If that's the case, humph. Chapter 743. Suda did not immediately say what he was about to snort, but the expressions of his subordinates in the tent all changed. Zamubala, the burly man with the name of White Tiger, stood up and said, "Great Khan, think twice before you act. We're not afraid of the mercenaries, but there's no point in fighting with them since we're the ones who stand out. It'll only benefit others." "Yes, Great Khan, this kind of thing that benefits others is not worth it." Another general, Bao Yin, also stood up and expressed his opinion. Both of them felt that it was not worth fighting with the mercenaries. Perhaps there was no benefit in winning, and it would only damage their strength if they lost. However, the mercenaries had defeated Agar Dorji's 50,000 cavalry, which made them feel afraid and did not want to fight. How could Suede not see through the thoughts of these two generals? He, who did not want to fight, took this opportunity to say, "Humph. Since the two generals have the same opinion, then let's retreat. Let's retreat to the north of Enma River first." Suede made the decision to retreat, which was a wise move. Speaking of which, the main force of Gobi Mongol was at the north of Enma River. He had already sent another general, Narasong, to gather the cavalry and young people of the tribes. The reason why he moved forward and occupied the Jianghu area was to control more territory and snatch more rich resources. However, now that the mercenaries had appeared and built the first city, it was equivalent to destroying all of his ideas. Sud Khan's retreat could be considered a wise choice. The dozens of tribes below had no choice but to put down their temporary encampments, leaving behind the beautiful grazing land in front of them and retreating together with the Khan. Not everyone was obedient. In this world, there were always some people who were not afraid of anything. They were optimistic that even if the sky fell, there would be someone tall to hold it up. As for the fact that they were unknown to the public, no one would have any ideas about them. Speaking of which, there were many people like this. They could not make the decision to give up the beautiful water plants in front of them and chose to stay. They were hoping that the mercenaries wouldn't notice them at all and would just brush past them. They should be chasing after the main force of Sud Khan. In the past, it was difficult for Yang Qindong to find them. But since he got the information provided by Mu Ren, he knew the distribution of the Mongolian tribes in the Jianghu area. When the scouts at the front sent news that the Sud Khan had begun to retreat, but there were still some small tribes and even some individual households that did not listen to the advice to leave, he immediately seized this opportunity. Nuzan Vanguard Regiment, don't stop. Continue to pursue and attack. Let the 1st Cavalry Regiment rush forward and rob the people and livestock. The Mongols were not the only ones who knew how to plunder people and resources. Mercenaries did the same. Currently, the first city was in the midst of development and construction. What it lacked the most was population. These were all good seedlings. According to their attitude of wanting money more than their lives, if these people were brought to the first city and saw the prosperous development there, they would not leave even if they were driven away. Yang Qindong's analysis was right. Those who knew that the mercenaries were coming but still did not give up their current territory were those who wanted money more than their lives. After they were robbed and brought to the first city, they quickly fell in love with it and made great contributions to the development and construction of the first city in the future. But that was all in the future. Let's talk about the present. When the head of Windchaser Regiment received the military order and began to plunder the Mongolian tribes separately, many people were shocked by this behavior. Didn't they say that robbing people and things was their specialty? Why did these Han Chinese troops learn from them? Was it a joke when others said that the great Ming dynasty was rich in resources and had a large population? No matter what these people thought, the 1st Cavalry Regiment of Windchaser Regiment did not show any mercy. From large tribes with hundreds of people to small individual households with only 3 to 5 people, they did not let any of them go. According to the information provided by Mu Ren before, they found every one of them accurately. In some places, according to the information, they could not see anyone, only some traces of tents. But in some places, they did find a large number of horses and sheep, as well as a small number of frightened Mongolian people. According to the military order, the mercenaries did not kill anyone. As long as the other party did not resist, they would only be taken away together with the animals. On the contrary, if they wanted to resist desperately, they would not show any mercy. Even before they got close to the enemy, the arrows from a distance were enough to kill them. This led to a situation where Sud Khan led the army and kept walking in front. Behind him, more and more tribal people who refused to leave became captives in the hands of the mercenaries. When this kind of news began to gather one by one, it finally aroused strong dissatisfaction from Sud Khan. Even the generals and soldiers below had angry expressions on their faces. Although he was angry, Sud Khan also knew that if he went back now and fought with the mercenaries, both sides would suffer losses. For the future, for the big picture, he could only bear with it. However, his mouth still did not let them off. Humph. Mercenaries, remember this. The contempt and sin that you have imposed upon us today will be paid back tenfold or even 100-fold in the future. In just 12 days, the 1st Cavalry Regiment of Windchaser Regiment had captured 5,000 Mongolian people, and the number of horses and sheep that they had captured was uncountable. With so many captives and resources suddenly increasing, the speed of the mercenaries was greatly affected, and the army started to slow down. Luckily, they had captured too much, especially some of the Mongolians who resisted. After they died, the horses and sheep became ownerless and could be used by the mercenaries. Kill some of the ownerless fat sheep to replenish the army's food. At the same time, send someone to inform Commander Yella to slow down and wait for our army to meet up. After knowing that Yella's Nuzan Cavalry Regiment was a day's journey away from the main army, Yang Chendong gave this order. Yang Chendong's military sense was really strong. The moment he felt that something was wrong, he immediately corrected it. However, this order was still a little too late. At this time, the Nuzan Cavalry Regiment was already being watched closely by Sud Khan. They had been chased for 12 days, and the Mongol army had even escaped first, so they had more than 12 days to escape. Finally, they came to the side of the river. Once they crossed this river, they would be able to meet up with more Mongol cavalry regiment. By the time they reached this point, Sud Khan's confidence had also become a lot stronger. Especially when the scouts at the rear sent news that a 3,000-man cavalry was 50 to 60 li behind them, while the main force of the mercenaries would take a full day to reach them. A smile that hadn't been seen for a long time appeared in Sud Khan's eyes. Ha ha ha, only 3,000 cavalry, and you dare to chase us so close? Since you don't know life from death, don't blame me for eating you. The enemy's forces were so small, and Sud Khan saw hope. After continuously retreating, the morale of the entire tribe was very low, and they urgently needed a victory to boost their morale. He immediately called his subordinates, Zamubala and Bao Yin, and told them his thoughts. Sud Khan looked at them expectantly, waiting for their decision. The two generals did not expect Sud Khan to have the idea of fighting with the mercenaries. However, when they heard that the enemy only had 3,000 cavalry behind them, they became excited. Although the mercenaries were tough bones and were not easy to chew, the result was that both sides would suffer heavy losses. However, the enemy only had 3,000 cavalry, and even if they fought, their losses would be limited. The important thing was that they had been running for so many days, and had long been suppressing the anger in their hearts. If they had the chance to vent it out, it would raise the morale of the army and the people. Fight. The two generals hesitated for a moment before making the same decision. You can't fight. While Sud Khan was still excited about the actions of the two generals, another crisp voice came from the entrance of the tent, and then Princess Narain Tuya's figure walked into the tent. Because of her figure, her boundless chest squeezed in before she arrived. Then, Princess Tuya's beautiful figure appeared. She first glared at the two generals, especially Bao Yin. This person had previously said that the mercenaries were very powerful, and fighting with them would not be worth the loss. But now, he actually advocated for a fight, which made her somewhat disappointed. After looking at the two generals, Tuya's gaze fell on Sud Khan. Father, you can't fight. The mercenaries are very powerful, and even the Walla's best fighter, Yes Hen, is not their opponent. Previously, there was the news of Agador's 50,000 cavalry being wiped out. If we fight with them, it will be difficult to win. What does a girl know? Seeing that his daughter dared to question his father's decision, Sud Khan's face immediately showed anger. To be able to become a Khan, there must be something good about him. After being in the position for so long, his body had formed a unique domineering aura. Normally, even someone as valiant as Zamubala wouldn't dare look him in the eyes. However, today, in front of Tuoya, she wasn't afraid at all. She looked straight back at her father's eyes. Fighting with the mercenaries will only cause our Gobi Mongol to fall into a state of eternal damnation. Living in the grasslands since childhood, Tuya was used to seeing people fight to the death with their enemies, and this made her admire heroes even more. And a long time ago, when she learned that the traitor of the grasslands had also been defeated by a young talent of the great Ming dynasty, she began to admire him. She had always wanted to meet him, to see what kind of person he was, to be able to defeat this traitor of the grasslands with less than 1/10 of his military strength. Chapter 744. However, Tuoya, who was not fated to enter the great Ming dynasty, thought that there was no hope in her life. She never thought that she would meet him on the grassland one day. However, she did not know him and missed him in the end. After the battle, when she found out that the Han youth who saved her from Hararushi was the war god of the great Ming dynasty that she had admired for a long time, she even had the idea of going to the beginning city to see this war god again. Her worship made Tuoya interested in Yang Chendong. Although it was not to the extent that she had feelings for him, at least she had a good impression of him. However, this was not enough to make her lose her mind. Especially when she saw her father's failed sneak attack last time, she sadly discovered that they seemed to have become enemies. Would there be a good result if she took the initiative to meet the enemy? However, she really wanted to see Yang Chendong and tell him that she admired him very much. Under such psychological contradictions, the mercenaries suddenly sent out their troops, and their target was the Mongol tribe in the Gobi Desert. When she first heard the news, Tuoya was a little angry. However, she thought about it from Yang Chendong's perspective. First, there was a sneak attack for no reason, and then there was the suspicion of instigating Wuxia. It seemed that the decision to send out troops was not a big deal. When the mercenaries sent out their troops, her father immediately made the decision to retreat, which made Tuoya very happy. Dodging the mercenaries' attack this time was a sign of weakness, but it was also a sign of goodwill. With this experience, as long as her father was willing to lower his head, it would be possible for him to become friends with the mercenaries. Tuoya believed that a true hero would not lower himself to the same level as a weakling. In a happy mood, although they were escaping, Tuoya's face was full of smiles. However, now that she suddenly heard that her father was going to fight with the mercenaries, and it was going to be a fight with many people, she wanted to take advantage of the situation and immediately stopped him. If this battle was fought, then no matter if they won or lost, they would only be enemies with the mercenaries in the future. It would be difficult for them to become friends. This was definitely not the result she wanted to see. What eternal damnation! This time, the mercenaries came with great force. We have already backed down, but they still captured a few thousand of our tribesmen. Who knows how many horses and sheep they captured? Have they ever considered our feelings? Let me tell you, we have to fight this battle. Not only that, we have to raise the morale of our Mongol cavalry. Men, take the princess away and keep a close eye on her. Without my orders, she will not have any freedom. Suitor, who had already made his decision, would not allow anyone to interfere with him. Even if this person was his beloved daughter, it was still the same. The bodyguards outside the tent heard the Khan's order and walked into the tent. They looked at Tuoya with an innocent expression and said, "Princess, we are just following orders. Please don't make things difficult for us." After saying that, someone came forward to invite Tuoya to leave. "Father, you can't hit him, or you'll regret it." Tuoya was taken away, but her voice still echoed in the air. "Don't bother about her. What does a girl know about important matters? How about this? Let's first discuss how to eliminate these 3,000 mercenaries." Suede forcefully banished his daughter's cries in his heart and continued to discuss military matters with the two generals. The Inma River was less than 100 miles ahead. When the Nuzan cavalry had chased them all the way here, they naturally slowed down. As the commander, Yella had the ability to command. He also knew that it was not a good idea to go in alone. However, he still chose to follow so closely. He wanted to wait for the enemy to cross the river before attacking them halfway. He wanted to achieve victory to show the Nuzan cavalry's ferocity. Reporting, "Commander, the 6th young master has given the order. He wants us to stay here and wait for the army to meet up." In the temporary military tent, as they were waiting for the news of the Mongol army crossing the river, a messenger came in and passed down Yang Chendong's order. Just as this messenger appeared, another scout that had been sent to the front also rushed back. Reporting, "Commander, the Mongol army has begun to cross the river." "Oh. It has begun? Ha ha ha." Yella's face was filled with excitement. After chasing for more than 10 days, the opportunity had finally come. Yella was still laughing when the vice commander, Lu Dai, suddenly said, "Commander, the 6th young master has just given the order." "Sai, what do you know? Haven't you heard that when a general is out there, he can't follow orders? Furthermore, although the 6th young master is strong, he is not at the front lines and does not know what is happening here. Naturally, he can't make the most accurate judgments." Yella waved his hand casually. He had already received news that the 1st Cavalry Regiment behind them had already made their move. Not only had they stolen countless horses and sheep, they had also captured more than 5,000 people. This was a great achievement. He had been jealous of this for a long time. Now that he finally had a chance to show off, how could he give it up? Even with Yang Chendong's military order, Yilla still had the idea of fighting a war. Otherwise, what was the point of him trying so hard to become the commander of the vanguard? If he did not have a chance to show off, wouldn't he be letting down the word vanguard? "Commander, but..." Lu Dai still wanted to say something. Yella waved his hand impatiently and said, "All right, if you are afraid, I will leave you with a battalion of cavalry here to wait for the main forces." It was obvious that Yella was angry. At this time, how could Lu Dai choose to stay? He nodded and said, "All right, then I will fight with Commander." "Ha ha ha, that's right. Men, go scout again. When you see the Mongolian vanguard crossing the river and boarding the rafts, report back immediately." Yella laughed heartily, as though he could already see countless merits waiting for him. Lu Dai could no longer stop Yella from sending out his troops. After he left the tent, he called for a soldier and said, "Bring 2 horses and leave. You must inform the 6th young master immediately. Tell him that we are going to attack the Mongolian vanguard." "Yes." The man nodded, then turned and left quickly. Lu Dai looked at the departing figure and sighed, "Let's hope that Commander's decision this time is right." The Mongolian vanguard had already started to cross the Inma River. Under the transport of the rafts, countless livestock and civilians crossed the river and left. However, what the outsiders did not know was that the Mongolian vanguard that had just been transported across the river had turned back. They quickly hid on both sides of the river. Due to the terrain, the scouts of the Jurchen cavalry regiment could only watch from afar and could not get close at all. This little trick was hidden from them. When he saw that there were only 5,000 to 6,000 enemies, the scout immediately turned around and reported the news to Commander Yella, who had already advanced 30 miles to the rear. After waiting for 10 hours, the opportunity finally appeared. Yella didn't want to wait a moment longer. She immediately gathered the troops and rode straight to the side of the Ima River. In front of the river, Sud Khan and a few other generals did not leave. They had been waiting for the mercenaries to come closer. However, after 10 hours, most of the vanguard had left, but the enemy still had not appeared. They could not help but feel anxious. Don't tell me the mercenaries are trying to chase us to the north of the river? Don't tell me they have no intention of fighting? Why don't we charge back? No, once we charge back, the enemy will have too much time to retreat. We won't be able to catch up to them. With a distance of 30 li, everyone was riding on horses. No matter which side it would be difficult to catch up to the other side. Amidst the discussions, Sudur Khan's expression turned ugly. Could it be that the mercenaries were really that careful? If that's the case, I'm afraid there won't be a chance. Just as Sud Khan and the other generals were sighing at how timid the mercenaries were, a scout finally ran over and reported loudly, "Khan, the mercenaries have moved out. They are approaching us from 30 li away." "Oh. They're finally here?" As if he had won the lottery, Sud Khan laughed out loud. The enemy had finally taken the bait. Now it was time for him to perform well. Pass down my orders, make preparations according to the previous plan. The various generals also left with excitement in their hearts, looking for their own troops that were lying in ambush, preparing to outflank and besiege the other party. Under the anticipation of everyone, the Nizan cavalry finally appeared after more than 2 hours. When they were about 5 li away from the river, they saw more than 2,000 Mongols anxiously crossing the river on wooden rafts. Just in time," Yella said happily. The enemy had less than 3,000 people, and they were running away in a hurry. They couldn't form any effective fighting force. If they rushed up now, they would be able to kill a lot. In this way, as the leader of the vanguard, he didn't disgrace his mission this time. "Attention everyone, charge with me, blow the bugle." Toot 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 toot, a loud bugle call sounded, and the 3,000 cavalrymen rapidly approached the side of the horse-drinking river. The sound of hooves landing on the ground caused clouds of smoke to rise. Under the setting sun, it was like a broken song of doomsday, blowing the bugle call of war. "They're finally here. Everyone pay attention, get off the rafts and fight. Archers, attack from afar. Everyone else, get on your horses and charge." Sud Khan, who couldn't wait any longer, smiled when he saw that the mercenaries had fallen for the trap. Only 3,000 people came. It was finally time for him to take revenge. The Mongol army methodically defended according to the previous plan. Many soldiers even got on their horses and flashed their sabers. This scene fell into the eyes of the vice-leader of the Nizan cavalry, Lu Dai, who was getting closer and closer. He felt that something was wrong. Chapter 745. Leader, something's not right. Look, the enemy isn't panicking at all. Instead, they seem to be prepared. Lu Dai's voice traveled into Yella's ears, and he couldn't help but take a closer look. Although he had doubts in his heart, he still said fearlessly, "It's fine, we have 3,000 elite cavalrymen, and the enemy has less than 3,000 men. Even if we face them head-on, they won't be a match for us. Charge." The comparison of forces and the quality of the soldiers gave Yella unlimited courage and confidence. However, not long after he said that, the ground around them suddenly trembled. Following that, a large number of Mongolian cavalry appeared on their left and right. From afar, they seemed to cover the sky and the earth, as if there was no end to them. "Not good, we've fallen into a trap. The enemy has set up an ambush." Lu Dai quickly reacted to the situation. When he saw that there were around 10,000 Mongolian cavalrymen in front and to the side, he cried out in surprise. Yela's expression finally changed. He could naturally tell that this was the enemy's plan to surround them. However, it was too late to retreat now. He gritted his teeth and shouted, "Brothers, don't be afraid. We'll fight to the death. At most, we'll be heroes again after 18 years. Yes. Don't be afraid. I've already sent someone to inform the 6th young master. I believe that reinforcements will arrive soon. That will be the time for us to obtain victory. Now, everyone listen to my orders. Use the 3-to-3 strategy to deal with the enemy. Don't kill the enemy, just protect yourselves first." Lu Dai's voice rang out, stabilizing the morale of the troops. "Did you send someone to inform the 6th young master?" Yela, who was at the side, asked with a suspicious look. "Yes, please forgive me for not asking for permission." Lu Dai replied. "It's fine. You did the right thing. Looks like the 6th young master is still the best. I shouldn't have disobeyed orders," Yela said with a face full of regret. At this moment, it was useless to say anything. Facing an enemy that was 3 times their size, and the enemy was already prepared, the Nuzan cavalry began to struggle for a long time. At this moment, the 3-3 tactic played a key role. Every group of 3 cavalrymen formed a small group, leaving their backs and sides to their comrades as much as possible. This allowed them to face the enemy, kill the enemy, and wound them without worry. Facing the sudden encirclement, the mercenaries were actually able to remain calm. This was out of the expectations of the Mongol cavalry. But no matter what, since the battle had already begun, there was no reason to stop. Relying on the fact that they were already prepared and had a large number of people, they charged in from all directions. Soon, the 2 sides were engaged in battle. The sounds of war horses neighing and the angry shouts of the cavalry rose and fell one after another. The sun was setting in the west, and the sky was already turning red. Bright red blood flowed out in front of the horse-drinking river. Cavalrymen were constantly being cut down from their horses, and the sounds of howling and screaming were endless. Yela waved his saber and slashed at the Mongol cavalry one after another. After fighting for less than 2 hours, his entire body was already covered in blood. However, whether the blood was from his own body or from the enemy's body, he was already unable to distinguish. Now, he only knew how to wield his saber mechanically. He only knew that when he saw someone who was not wearing a military uniform, he would wield his saber and slash at them. Under such desperate resistance, the last ray of the setting sun finally fell, and the sky began to turn dark. Once the sky turned dark, it was difficult for both sides to unleash their full strength. When they could not see the situation on the other side, the speed of their attacks became more careful. It was as if they were afraid that they would hurt their comrades if they were not careful. Using this opportunity, Yela could finally heave a sigh of relief. The continuous slashing just now seemed to have used up all the strength in his body. When he finally had a chance to rest, he felt that his right arm holding the saber had become very heavy. It was as if in the next moment, he would not be able to raise it again. "Who is it?" Although he was very tired, he was still alert. When he felt that someone had appeared beside him, he instinctively slashed his saber. But it was immediately blocked. Then, the familiar voice of the vice commander, Lu Dai, rang out. "Commander, it's me." Lu Dai, you're still alive. How are you?" When he heard Lu Dai's voice, Yela forced a smile. His face was filled with relief. "I'm fine. The soldiers and I fought according to the 3-to-3 strategy. There weren't too many casualties." As he spoke, Lu Dai had already come to Yela's side. When he got closer, he could finally see that there was a thick layer of blood on Yela's body. He could not help but ask softly, "Commander, are you injured?" "No, this is the blood of the enemy," Yela said proudly. But at the same time, he knew that he had reached his limit. He might not be able to kill more than a few enemies before he was really injured and killed. Hearing that Yela was not injured, Lu Dai was relieved. He then looked around and said, "Commander, it's dark. The enemy can't attack, but they should be lighting up torches soon. If that's the case, I'm afraid our situation won't be too good." I know. Let's do this. Inform the soldiers to follow the Mongolian army. If they retreat, we will retreat too. Don't raise your torches. If you see someone with a torch, then he must be an enemy. Kill him." Yella nodded and gave the order to attack the enemy. Both sides were now in a mess. It was really you and me. There was no distinction between them. At this time, if anyone dared to light up a torch, they would be the first to be lit up. They would unavoidably become a target for everyone. "Yes, Commander." After Lu Dai agreed, he said to the few soldiers beside him, "Go and pass on the commander's order. If you don't see where our brothers are, shout. This way, everyone can hear you." In the darkness, they stopped the Mongol army from killing people. At the same time, they also stopped the Nuzan cavalry from giving out orders. Fortunately, the voices could be heard clearly in the darkness. After a series of shouts, the soldiers quickly knew what was going to happen and how to deal with it. The shouts also reached the ears of the Mongol army. In fact, they already had people holding torches and preparing to light them up. After all, with torches, they could differentiate between each other. They would know where to kill and who to kill. However, the shouts made some of the people who wanted to light up their torches hesitate. They were really afraid of becoming a target. However, there were still some people who did not believe in heresy. In the end, they still lit up their torches. The moment the light appeared, it was naturally very eye-catching in the darkness. When everyone looked towards the source of the light, there were also arrows that pierced through the air. There were even sounds of sabers being swung down the moment the flames appeared. Regardless of whether it was the archers attacking from afar or the sabers attacking from close range, there was only one result. All the Mongolian riders who lit up their torches became the target of everyone. They became the first targets and targets to be attacked. Not only that, when the torches were lit up, even some of the cavalry who were illuminated by the light were killed on their horses. Most of them were Mongol cavalry. There were also a few Nuzan cavalry who were killed. "Bastard, I don't want torches. Don't light them up next to me. Otherwise, my saber is not to be trifled with." Seeing that not only the people who lit up their torches but also the people around them were about to be implicated, loud shouts rang out. These shouts were all from the Mongol cavalry. After all, everyone was afraid of death. Especially when they had the chance to win, no one wanted to die. The strategy of using torches to kill the enemy in the darkness failed. This was because everyone was too close. It was so close that the enemy could be 3 meters away from them. However, no one wanted to test it with their lives. No one wanted to gamble with their lives. This led to a strange phenomenon. They were clearly enemies, and they were very close to each other. However, on this night, they were actually living in peace. Everyone seemed to have reached a tacit understanding and were waiting for the arrival of dawn. They were all saving their strength. When the time came, it would be time for them to be at their wits' end. At the periphery of the battlefield, Suade's face was filled with despair and anger. He thought that with more than 10,000 cavalry, the most elite force by his side, it would be easy to deal with the 3,000 unprepared enemy cavalry who were surrounded by him. With just one charge, it would crush the enemy's fighting spirit. That would be the time to reap the fruits of victory. However, after fighting for more than 2 hours, not only did they not scare the enemy, but the sky had also darkened. Now, they could not even light up their torches and could only wait for dawn. This made him feel depressed. Zamubala and Bao Yin's expressions were not any better. However, they did not have any better ideas. Other than waiting, it seemed that they could only wait. Of course, it was not completely impossible. For example, they could distribute bows and arrows to the battlefield. This way, they could at least kill some mercenary cavalry. However, on the battlefield, it seemed that they had more cavalry. If they really did that, it would only cause a greater mutiny. They thought of withdrawing their troops, but they were also worried that the mercenaries would turn around and escape. If that happened, they did not know if there would be any hope for them to chase after them. This would not work, that would not work. They could only wait helplessly. The night seemed to be very long and the waiting time seemed to be very torturous. 2 hours passed, then another 2 hours passed. After the sky darkened, it would be dawn. This was an iron law. Gradually, when a smear of white appeared in the distant sky, the sky also slowly brightened. With the arrival of dawn, the originally silent battlefield was suddenly filled with shouts of killing, and became lively again. Chapter 746. After a night of waiting, everyone felt like they were about to go crazy. Finally, they could see their opponents clearly and kill them with their swords. Everyone seemed to have used up all their strength. The clanging sounds were endless. After a night of hard work, the moment the two sides clashed, countless heads fell to the ground, countless riders fell off their horses, countless blood flowed, and countless lives were ended. The sky was finally bright and the difference in strength between the two sides was clearly shown. Looking at the battlefield, there were only about 700 people left from the original 3,000 Nuzan cavalry. Almost all of them were injured, and they all looked tired. On the other hand, the Mongolian cavalry from Mabe had lost even more men. Under the effect of the 3-3 strategy and the advantage of weapons like sabers, they had lost around 4,000 men. However, because of their advantage in numbers, they were still strong. Kill them all, don't leave a single one alive. Looking at the battlefield, the number of casualties on his side was even higher. Suitor was sweating profusely. He finally witnessed the strength of the mercenaries. If he wasn't the one who ambushed them, it was highly doubtful that his 10,000 men would be able to defeat the 3,000 cavalrymen in a head-on clash. Suitor Khan gave the order and all the Mongolian cavalry started the final charge with their advantage in numbers. Every Nuzan cavalry had to face at least 3 or 4 enemies. Luckily, the 3-3 strategy was still working. As long as their comrades didn't die, they didn't have to worry about their flanks. This allowed them to use their full strength and try their best to injure and kill their enemies. Even so, after a night of tension, the Nuzan cavalry had used up most of their strength. If this continued, it was only a matter of time before the whole cavalry was wiped out. Tong! Tong tong! Tong 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 tong, tong 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 tong. The ground shook again and black figures started to appear in the distance. First, it was 1, then 10, then 100, 1,000. When more and more black figures appeared, a bright 5-star flag fluttered in the wind. In the early morning, it was very bright and dazzling. The reinforcements were finally here. After Yang Chendong gave the order for the vanguard to stop advancing, he felt that something was wrong. He was well aware of the combat power of the Nuzan cavalry regiment. It could be said that unless they used firearms like the 3 divisions of the Cold Front, no one would be a match for them if they only used cold weapons in a battle. He was satisfied with the strength of the Jurchen cavalry regiment, but at the same time, he was slightly worried. The stronger a person was, the more arrogant they would be. Once the opportunity appeared, in order to perform better, they would most likely not listen to his orders. Yang Chendong was proud, but he was never arrogant. He had a good understanding of the generals under his command, especially the ones he had put in important positions. If he gave orders to Zhou Feng's reinforced first group, or Lu Zhua's reinforced second group, they would unconditionally listen to his orders. However, this might not be the case for the Jurchen and Tatar cavalry. Because he was worried, Yang Chendong added another order, which was for the 3 divisions of the Cold Front to send a group to support them. It would be best if the Jurchen cavalry regiment listened to his orders, but if the situation changed, he had to think of a way to pull them back and try to stop them from moving ahead. In history, Ma Su was a smart person and was valued by Zhuge Liang. However, because of his arrogance, he lost his footing and caused the Shu army's plan to fail. Since there was a lesson in front of him, Yang Chendong had to be prepared. After receiving the order, the 3 divisions of the Cold Front personally led a group of fast horses and set off. They threw down all the heavy equipment and traveled light. While they were moving forward, they met the scouts sent by Deputy Commander Lu Dai and found out what the Nuzhan cavalry was going to do next. As a result, their footsteps became even faster. They rushed all the way and finally arrived at the battlefield 10 hours after the battle had ended. At this time, the Jurchen cavalry regiment was basically crippled. The original 3,000 cavalry was only left with 600, and they had lost 4/5 of their forces. This was the Jurchen cavalry regiment. Their combat strength was really high, and they could even fight one-on-one with the scouts. If it was any other cavalry regiment, they would have been wiped out and would not have been able to hold on until now. However, after 10 hours, they still had to rely on the darkness of the night. At this moment, they were like an arrow at the end of its flight. Facing an army several times their size and the Mongol elites from Mabe who were prepared, they had already used up all their strength. Blow the charge horn. The first unit will be the vanguard, the second unit will attack from the left, the third unit will attack from the right, the fourth and fifth units will follow me as the middle to charge. Seeing that the battlefield was right in front of him, Commander Wu Xing's eyes revealed a strong murderous aura. He was also very excited. The Jurchen cavalry regiment was not finished yet. This made him feel a sense of relief. At the same time, when he saw so many Mongol cavalry surrounding their allies, Wu Sheng was really angry. Did they think that they were easy to bully? Since they dared to set a trap for the mercenaries, then he would kill them until their parents could not recognize them. The first unit of the 3rd Cold Front Regiment rushed all the way here because they wanted to fight. The opportunity was right in front of them. From the regiment commander to the ordinary soldiers in every combat squad, everyone became excited at this moment. Even the soldiers in the catering squad had their eyes shining with excitement. The first to charge out was the 1st Regiment, 1st Unit, 1st Company Commander Tang Longtian. This was the former Jianzhou Left Guard Commander Qian Shi of Baiming. He was a grade 4 martial officer, but during the Battle of Liao River in the new, Gandusi region, he lost to the mercenaries and became a captive. However, a general was a general. Once he straightened out his attitude and thought things through, it did not take long for him to display a strong military talent and personal qualities. In the end, he obtained a high score in the military examination. After that, a few regiments passed him an olive branch, expressing their thoughts of taking him in as a member. Everyone else was fine as long as they had a unit, but Tang Longtian had so many choices that he was put in a difficult position. However, in the end, he still decided to join the 3rd Division of the Cold Front. Even though he could only start as a normal soldier, unlike the other units where he was given the position of squad leader, vice squad leader, or even platoon leader, he still made the decision. In his opinion, since he was going to join the mercenaries, he would choose the strongest unit to join. Gold would always shine. After Tang Longtian joined the 3rd Cold Front Regiment, he was assigned to the 1st Regiment. His performance was outstanding, and he was promoted as an exception. In the end, he was promoted to the position of 1st Company Commander. Now, he was the vanguard of the vanguard, leading the 1st Company Commander and charging forward. The sudden appearance of the 5-star flag and the sound of the bugle horn were like a tonic that flowed into the hearts of Yella and the other 600 Nuzhan cavalry soldiers. When they turned around and saw a large group of mercenaries charging from afar, many of them actually had tears in their eyes. This was the benefit of being an organization. Although it was free to do things alone, but once they met with danger, they could only face it alone. If they could not survive, then only death awaited them. With an organization, it was completely different. Just like what was happening now, the mercenaries had sent reinforcements. This meant that they would not have to die. Not only that, they could hold off the Mongol cavalry and perhaps even turn the situation around. Yella was able to become a regiment commander not only because of his bravery, but also because he was quick-witted. He immediately shouted, "Don't retreat anymore. Keep the enemy occupied and buy time for the main force to arrive." Roar! The 600 cavalry soldiers in the regiment all roared in agreement. Then, they changed their attitude of retreating and suddenly launched a ferocious attack on the middle of the Mongol army. Potential was something that was hard to predict. Usually, one could unleash several times their strength. Everything depended on the situation and the atmosphere. Now, the Jurchen cavalry regiment was able to display their potential and suddenly became lively and lively. Correspondingly, the Mongol cavalry panicked. They had originally thought that the enemy would definitely be defeated, and that they only needed to chase after them like a dog that had fallen into the water. Who would have thought that the enemy would have reinforcements? The moment the sun rose, before they could unleash their full strength, the enemy had appeared. The Mongol cavalry, who were already shocked by the Nuzan cavalry's stubbornness, had already lost their will to fight. After all, anyone would instinctively want to hide as far away as possible when facing a dying person who was looking for someone to fight for their life. Now, not only was the Nuzan cavalry fighting to the death, there was also a mercenary army. How were they going to fight this battle? Many of the Mongol cavalry who had their own plans started to retreat. They tried their best to stay away from the Nuzan cavalry to save their own lives. The Mongol cavalry retreated and avoided them. This was equivalent to opening up a path for the Nuzan cavalry, giving them more chances to reach the middle of the army and threaten the enemy commander. One could imagine what kind of scene it would be if they were entangled with the mercenaries and the main force of the mercenaries came to kill them. Sud Khan was also shocked by this scene. He did not expect the mercenary reinforcements to arrive so quickly. He knew that he did not have much time left. He turned around and looked at the Inma River. Seeing that the wooden rafts were ready, he immediately made a wrong decision. Retreat, retreat with me. As long as we retreat to the other side of the river, they will not be able to do anything. Was it right to retreat? Chapter 747. Of course, it was not a mistake. It was just that the timing was not right. He could have arranged for a group of cavalry to block the charge of the Nuzan cavalry and retreat. However, the Sudda, whose life was in danger, was afraid and made a wrong decision. He did not leave anyone behind to defend against the enemy. Instead, to save his own life, he was the first to dismount and lead his horse onto the wooden raft. This caused the Mongolian cavalry, whose morale was shaken, to lose their morale and become chaotic. Along with Sudur Khan getting on the wooden raft, the other Mongol cavalry saw that the situation was not good and did not hold back. They all got off their horses and charged onto the wooden raft. At that moment, they finally had a chance to show off their nimble and agile skills. All of them risked their lives to get on the wooden raft and retreat. Along with them were his generals Samubala and Bao Yin. Since even the Khan wanted to escape, why would they be so foolish as to bring their men to block the enemy? They were the same as everyone else, they only had one life. The commander and a few other generals were the first to escape. After the wooden raft was filled, they quickly rowed towards the center of the river, leaving behind many Mongol cavalry who did not get on the wooden raft. All of them were anxious. Seeing the Nuzan cavalry charge right in front of them, they could only brace themselves and charge up. They could not retreat and could only fight. This was a choice that they had no other choice. However, such a choice was something that they had no choice but to do. They were destined to lose their morale and fighting spirit. They were destined to be a pile of loose sand and would definitely fail. Commander Yella used the last of his strength to lead Deputy Commander Lu Dai and the other 600 warriors to wave their blades and kill the Mongol cavalry who were already panicking and afraid. Under this kind of attack, the enemies were quickly scattered in all directions. The number of soldiers was many times their number, but without the orders of their general, they could only dodge and hide. They could not display their original strength. Tang Longtian arrived. As the vanguard of the vanguard, the moment the order was given, he led the first company to charge to the front. When they were less than 50 meters away from the first batch of Mongol cavalry, the warriors of the first company raised their right arms and took out their steel crossbows. 7 consecutive shots lit up, and arrows shot forward effortlessly. They hit the Mongolian cavaliers who were caught off guard and were still in a state of panic. In just a short encounter, dozens of enemies were killed. However, this was just the beginning. The 7 consecutive shots continued to display its advantage. Under the rapid firing of arrow after arrow, the Mongolian cavalrymen who were thrown into disarray were shot down from their horses and lost their ability to fight. In this battle, Tang Longtian could be said to have killed to his heart's content. Facing the Mongol army that had lost all morale and were only focused on escaping, forgetting that they still had bows and arrows on their backs and could retaliate, the Mongol army actually quickly fired out all 7 consecutive shots, killing over 300 of their enemies in the process. This was equivalent to unleashing more than 300% of his combat strength. This was a great contribution. Overjoyed, Tang Longtian put away his 7 consecutive shots and shouted to his subordinates, "Draw your swords, kill the enemy, it's time to make contributions. Kill!" The 100 warriors who did not lose any of their men shouted loudly and cooperated with him. Then, they followed behind their company commander and stabbed into the chaotic Mongolian cavaliers like a needle. Tang Longtian was charging forward with all his might, showing that he wanted to meet up with the Nuzan cavalry. Behind him, the commander of the 1st Battalion, Guofeng, led the other 3 companies and rushed over. Another wave of 7 consecutive shots heavily injured the Mongol cavalry, greatly reducing the enemy's strength and achieving the goal of heavily injuring the enemy and breaking their hearts. The 2nd and 3rd battalions followed the orders and attacked from the left and right, forcing the Mongol cavalry who were running away in all directions back to the main formation. Then, Division Commander Wuxia led the 4th and 5th battalions to charge forward, giving the Mongol cavalry another heavy blow, causing them to feel as if they had nothing left to live for. In the middle of the Enma River, the wooden raft was still crossing the river. Cold sweat flowed down Khan Sud's forehead uncontrollably. He was afraid and angry. When he saw his soldiers on the riverbank facing the charge of the mercenaries, they were unable to fight back at all. When they were either dead or injured, his heart was bleeding. However, he was also glad that he was fast enough to escape into the river. Otherwise, he might really be in danger. However, he did not think that if he did not escape immediately and waited for battle, he might have a chance to bring more soldiers across the river. After all, the reinforcements this time were only a regiment of about 2,000 men. Moreover, one of the battalions was a reserve battalion. Their combat strength was not as strong as the other battalions. This was also why the 3 cold front regiments only had 5,200 men. However, it was too late to say anything now. He had already retreated and no matter what, he would not go back. All he could do was pray in his heart and hope that his soldiers could rely on their own strength to escape. In fact, there were indeed some Mongol cavalry who were skilled in riding and had quick thinking who escaped. After all, they had the advantage in numbers. However, there were very few of them. During this battle, even though the 1st Regiment of the 3 Cold Vanguard Divisions did not use the 95 style they carried on their backs because they wanted to increase their accuracy when they fought on horseback, the 7 consecutive shots in their hands were still quite useful. The waves of arrows destroyed the courage of the Mongolian cavaliers, and there were less than 1,000 enemies who truly dared to flee at this moment. There were more than 600 people on the rafts, but 1,000 of them escaped. The rest were either killed, injured, or captured. The 10,000 Mongol army was killed by the Nuzan cavalry and the 3rd Cold Front Division. Around 6,000 people were injured and 1,500 people were captured. The war was finally over. As the wooden raft crossed the middle of the Enma River, it disappeared behind the other side. The Mongol cavalry who were still alive made a smart choice. They dismounted and surrendered. At this time, Wuxia came to the side of Commander Yella and Deputy Commander Lu Dai. "How are you guys? Do you need a medic to treat your injuries?" "We're fine. Even if we're injured, it's just that we don't have any strength left." Yella smiled bitterly and shook his head to reject the medic Wuxia sent. Although they had won the battle, their losses were also huge. Moreover, these losses were caused by his disobedience to military orders and making the wrong decision. This caused his expression to become unsightly. Yella did not even know what to do next. How could he face the 6th young master as a criminal? As if he could see that Yella was not in a good mood, Wuxia patted him on the shoulder and said, "Okay, don't think too much. The 6th young master is wise. You have to believe in this. The reason why Wuxia was so nice to Yella when he disobeyed orders was naturally because of the bravery he displayed. The 3,000 Nuzan cavalry actually fought the 10,000 Mongol cavalry for an entire night and even heavily injured them. This kind of result was not bad even in the 3rd Cold Front Division. Since they could fight, they should be respected. Wuxia's words seemed to give Yella some confidence. At the very least, he forced a smile on his face. Thank you, Teacher Wu. No need to thank me. It's all because of your performance that I admire. Wuxia nodded gently and then said to the correspondent beside him, immediately send someone to report this matter to the 6th young master. At the same time, send someone to the nearby forest to find wood and get a carriage. I think the comrades of the Jurchen cavalry regiment are tired. Let them get on the carriage and have a good rest. The smoke of the battle gradually dissipated and the river drinking horse returned to silence. Wuxia, who had chased away the Sud, did not intend to pursue. Firstly, he did not have a ready-made wooden raft. If he wanted to rush, he would need time. Who knew where the enemy would escape during this time? Secondly, with the experience of Yella's Nuzan cavalry, if he forced his way across the river and the Mongol cavalry was waiting for him on the other side, wouldn't he be sending himself to be attacked? One was in the river and the other was on the shore. There was not much of an advantage. He didn't give the order to pursue and instead turned back. This indeed made the plan of Sud Khan, who was waiting on the other side of the Enma River, fail. Just as he crossed the river, another general under him, Naderasong, also brought 20,000 cavalry over. He then formed an encirclement and waited for the mercenaries to appear. However, after waiting for a long time and not seeing anyone, the Sud Khan sent a wooden raft across the river. Only then did he know that the mercenaries had already retreated. Khan, let's chase. They only have 2,000 people and most of them are tired. They can't be our match. Naderasong, who had not seen the strength of the mercenaries, suggested. How could the Sud Khan not want to turn the tables? However, thinking about the stubbornness of the mercenaries and the possibility of reinforcements appearing at any time, he shook his head and said, forget it. Let them be. Anyways, as long as they can't cross the river drinking horse, we will be safe. Our tribe will also be safe. The Sud Khan was really scared after being beaten. 2 battles in a row and 2 defeats. One of them was when he had the advantage in numbers and his plan had succeeded. However, he still could not take down the enemy. He really did not know how he could defeat the mercenaries. He was afraid and even had a shadow in his heart. This was the result that Yang Qindong wanted. He did not expect to completely destroy the Mongol army in this battle. The enemy had 600,000 soldiers and soldiers. Such an opponent was not something that he could defeat with his current strength. He did not have such a big appetite. Beating the enemy until they were afraid and did not dare to find trouble with him was the main goal of this battle. Now it seemed that the strategy had been achieved. Just from this point alone, it was worth it to send out troops. Chapter 748. Wuxia retreated and soon met up with the main force of the Cold Front Division. Then, the army retreated and finally met up with Yang Qindong's army. At this time, Yi La and Lu Dai, who had been resting in the carriage, also regained their energy. As soon as they returned to the camp, the 2 of them knelt in front of the 6th young master's tent and didn't get up for a long time. Yang Qindong listened carefully to Wuxia's report and learned about some details of the battlefield and the bravery of the Nuzan cavalry. 6th young master, these Nuzan cavalrymen are really good. If it were us cold vanguard warriors who didn't use guns, I'm afraid that they would be able to do the same. They are really good, so, Wuxia stuttered, which attracted Yang Qindong's attention. What are you trying to say? Wuxia's heart skipped a beat when Yang Qindong looked at him. Although he was now the commander of the Cold Front Division and was a high-ranking officer in the army, he was still a primary school student in front of Yang Qindong. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that Yang Qindong only needed to say one word to make him lose everything. Therefore, when facing Yang Qindong, Wuxia did not dare to have the slightest bit of arrogance and pride. Seeing that Wuxing didn't speak, Yang Qindong snorted and said, "You want to plead for them, right?" "Yes, I want to plead on their behalf." Wuxing straightened his body and puffed out his chest as much as he could as he spoke. "Okay, then you can go out and kneel." This time, Yang Qindong didn't even raise his head and said this casually. Wuxing was stunned when he heard this. He didn't seem to have heard it clearly and had a puzzled look on his face. Then, Beta Persei's loud voice rang out. "Don't you want to plead for them? Then go out and kneel. Isn't it clear?" Oh, I know," Wuxing said as if he had just realized something. He didn't forget to give a standard military salute before leaving the tent and kneeling outside. "Okay, you've become smarter." Now that there was no one else in the tent, Yang Qindong raised his head and glanced at Beta Persei. The other party actually understood the meaning of his words. It seemed that Beta Persei, who had followed him, was no longer a martial artist. He had also learned to use his wisdom. Hee. After being praised by Yang Qindong, Beta Persei showed an embarrassed smile, and then flattered, "Even a stone will be enlightened if you follow young master every day." "Huh, that's a good analogy." Yang Qindong laughed heartily. He was also considering how to deal with Yella. Logically speaking, if he disobeyed a military order, he would definitely be severely punished. The lightest punishment would be demotion, the heaviest punishment would be to have him retire from active service, or even to be charged with a crime. However, he had won the battle and showed his capable side. There weren't many of such generals even in the mercenary army. It would be a great loss to not let him lead the troops. He had to be punished even if he was guilty. Otherwise, if the other officers followed suit, wouldn't it be a mess? For a moment, Yang Qindong couldn't openly go easy on him. At this moment, Wuxing stood up and gave him a hint to solve the problem. In this way, he let the other party go out and beg for mercy. In this way, the law couldn't punish the masses, and he had a way out. Most importantly, after this incident, the officers below could be more united. It could be said to be killing two birds with one stone. Outside the tent, Wuxing, who was wearing the rank of senior colonel and wearing a white cloak, came out and knelt on the ground, level with Yella and Lu Dai. This scene shocked the two of them so much that their eyes widened. Lu Dai was even more puzzled and asked, "Commander Wu, didn't you make a meritorious service? Why are you kneeling here with us?" This was also the question Yella wanted to ask. Wuxing shook his head and said with a bitter smile, "I'm pleading for mercy on your behalf. Although you disobeyed orders in this battle, under the circumstances, if I was the one leading the troops, I'm afraid I would have made the same choice." He said that he was pleading for mercy on their behalf, and that he would have made the same choice. When Yella and Lu Dai heard this, the two of them couldn't help but shed tears of joy. It was as if they had found a confidant, as if they had found a family member who understood them the most. They cried and were emotional. Wuxing's actions also made Yella and Lu Dai feel warmth. Although it was true that they were prisoners of war and had some other thoughts in their hearts, Wuxing's actions completely suppressed the last bit of small thoughts in their hearts, letting them know what the warmth of a family was like. Not long after Wuxing knelt on the ground, the political commissar of the 3 divisions, Chen Bo, arrived. Seeing the scene in front of him, he only pondered for a moment before kneeling on the ground with a plop. He didn't say much, but the intention to plead for mercy was very obvious. After Chen Bo, the 3rd commander of the 3 divisions, Chunyang, and the 1st commander of the reinforced cavalry, Zhui Feng, also rushed over and knelt in front of the tent. Their appearance became a spectacle that all the soldiers in the army could see and discuss. The commander of the Tatar cavalry, Su He, naturally knew about this matter very quickly. Hassan, who came to report, saw Su He's frown and said, "Commander, I think you should also kneel and plead for the commander and vice-commander of the Nuzhan cavalry." "Why?" Su He asked in confusion. "Commander, think about it. Everyone is going. If you don't go, wouldn't you be an exception? You will be ostracized. We are also new here. It's better not to do something that will offend people." Hassan said anxiously. He didn't understand. When it came to planning on the battlefield, Suhi's ability was indeed not bad. Even the sixth young master acknowledged this point. Otherwise, he wouldn't have become the commander of the Tatar cavalry. But when it came to interpersonal relationships, this Suhi was a little lacking. As a subordinate, Hassan saw this point and felt that it was necessary for him to remind him. Everyone is going, so do I have to go? I'm not familiar with Yi La and Lu Dai, let alone have a personal relationship with them. Besides, this time they were punished because they disobeyed orders. Why should I plead for them? Isn't this supporting the people under me to disobey orders? I'm not going. Shaking his head firmly, Suhi added, let's go. If we have the time, let's go down and see the army and urge them to hurry up with their training. Suhi's stubbornness made Hassan shake his head. But he was the commander. Since he had made a decision, how could he, a small company commander, question it at will? With a long sigh, he followed the commander to the temporary training ground. Outside Yang Qindong's tent, except for the commander of the Tatar cavalry, Suhi, the other officers of the regiment and above rushed over to plead for Yi La and Lu Dai. This kind of scene naturally made the two Jurchen generals feel touched and grateful. In the tent, Beta Persei walked in and whispered in Yang Qindong's ear, young master, Commander Suhi went to the training ground to supervise the soldiers under him. Well, you did a good job. Yang Qindong nodded with satisfaction. He had expected that Suhi did not come to plead for mercy. Since there was no friendship between them and he thought that Yi La and Lu Dai's approach was wrong, why would he plead for them? Wasn't this to embarrass the sixth young master? I told you that Suhi is reasonable. Yang Qindong smiled and looked at Beta Persei, who was standing aside with an embarrassed expression. Just now, Beta Persei said that he was afraid that all the officers of the regiment and above would come forward to plead for mercy. Yang Qindong denied it. He asserted that others might, but Suhi would not. For this reason, the two of them made a bet that whoever lost would do 500 push-ups. Although Beta Persei did not dare to let Yang Qindong fulfill his promise even if he won, it was enough to comfort his soul. But he did not expect that he would still lose the bet. Seeing that Yang Qindong was staring at him, Beta Persei could only put his hands on the ground and began to complete the bet. Yang Qindong continued to close his eyes and rest, forgetting about the officers kneeling on the ground outside. Since he wanted to plead for mercy, he should look like he was pleading for mercy. By the time Yang Air was done with the 500 push-ups, the sky was about to turn dark. The master and servant walked out of the tent at a leisurely pace. They didn't even look at the people kneeling outside as they rushed straight to the place where they had their meal. Yang Qindong didn't pay attention to the crowd. Yi La, whose legs were already sore from kneeling, said with a bitter expression, everyone, I and Deputy Commander Lu appreciate your kind intentions, but you should go back. If there's any crime, we brothers will take responsibility for it. I was the one who disobeyed the military order in the first place, so any punishment is only right. That's right. You guys should go back. It's time for dinner. Vice Captain Lu Dai also spoke up. Wu Sheng and the others did not seem to hear the words of the two. They were still kneeling there with their heads raised, their gazes firm and resolute. They seemed to have determined their actions from the moment they knelt down. They would not get up unless there was a result. Looking at this scene, Yi La and Lu Dai were very excited. At the same time, they were constantly reflecting in their hearts. If there was a chance, they must perform better in the future. Yang Qindong and Beta Persei came back after dinner, but they still did not look at the people kneeling on the ground. Instead, they returned to the tent. Just like this, time passed by little until the sky was completely dark. It was time to rest and sleep. Under the supervision of the battalion-level officers, each of the military camps entered the tent to rest. Outside the main tent, several regimental commanders were still kneeling on the ground. They did not get up, nor were there any orders for them to get up. The lights-out signal resounded throughout the entire military camp. Except for the temporary medical team who still had candlelight and the wounded who could not sleep due to the pain, the entire military camp entered a state of silence. At this time, there was finally movement from the main tent. Beta Persei walked out. Come in, all of you. The young master wants to see you. Chapter 749. Yes. Wu Sheng and the others hurriedly responded. Then, one by one, they supported their numb legs and walked into the tent. The tent was already lit with candles, making it extremely bright. Yang Qindong was reading an ancient book in his hands. He waited for Wu Sheng and the others to enter the tent one by one before he slowly raised his head. His cold gaze swept across everyone's faces. Everyone who was stared at by Yang Qindong could not help but lower their heads, as if they had done something wrong. Just when everyone was feeling uneasy and did not know how the sixth young master would deal with them, Yang Qindong finally spoke. It's already late at night, and the soldiers are already asleep. What does this mean? Faced with this sudden question, everyone was stunned. They were at a loss and did not know how to answer. Wu Sheng's face was filled with confusion at first. Then, he turned his head and his gaze fell on Political Commissar Chen Bo, wanting an answer. However, at this time, Chen Bo was also confused. He did not understand why the sixth young master would ask such a question. Even Chen Bo did not know, let alone the others. Everyone was stunned and did not know how to answer. All of this was seen clearly by Yang Qindong. Then, his voice sounded again, this means that with or without you, the army will still exist. What should be done will be done. Oh. Everyone suddenly understood, and then their faces turned red. They finally understood the sixth young master's meaning. There were indeed arrogant people among them who thought that it was because of them that the soldiers under them were so obedient and could win the war. However, now that Yang Qindong said this, they were surprised to find that without them, the soldiers under them were still very orderly. In that case, wouldn't their role become very small? The reason why Yang Qindong chose to meet them after they fell asleep was to warn them in this way. Don't think that things will fall into chaos just because the army left. Facts have proven that the earth will continue to spin even without anyone, even without Yang Qindong. Yang Qindong sighed and said, facts have proven that it wasn't you who made these adorable warriors, but these adorable warriors who made you. So please put away your arrogance and think more about the warriors on the battlefield in the future. Sometimes, a wrong decision can cost them their lives. Do you understand? Yes, sixth young master, we understand. Everyone answered in unison. This was not a perfunctory reply, but a genuine sense of regret in his heart. Everyone looked regretful. Yi La and Lu Dai knelt on the ground again and said, sixth young master, we were wrong. We thought too highly of ourselves and didn't care about the safety of our brothers. You were wrong. Because of your wrong decision, many Jurchen elites died. This is a lesson that not only you, but everyone else must remember. Yes, we will remember. Wu Sheng, Chen Bo, and the others answered as if they had benefited greatly. It was obvious that this sentence came from the bottom of their hearts. Yang Qindong was very satisfied in his heart, but he still said with an unforgiving look, since you did something wrong, you should be prepared to be punished. Yi La, Lu Dai, the two of you disobeyed military orders and made mistakes in command. Each of you will be recorded with a major demerit and your salary will be deducted for half a year. If there is a next time, you will be expelled from the army. Do you have any objections? Hearing that they could continue to lead troops, Yi La and Lu Dai did not dare to have any objections. They nodded and promised that there would not be a next time. As for the others, each of you will be recorded with a demerit and your salary will be deducted for half a year. Do you have any objections? Wu Sheng and the others did not expect that when they came to plead for leniency, they would also be punished. They did not care about the salary for half a year. As long as they made contributions, they would be able to receive shiny silver. This was much more than their salary. But since it was Yang Qindong's order, no one dared to object. They all nodded in agreement. They did not know that the reason why he was so strict and even punished those who pleaded for leniency was because Yang Qindong did not want this to happen a second time. Otherwise, once someone made a mistake, the others would also plead for leniency. wouldn't that be a mess? How would he be able to lead troops into battle? The matter was finally resolved. Wu Sheng and the others returned to the barracks exhausted. Yang Qindong put down the ancient book in his hand and came to the sand table in the tent. He looked around and pointed to Su Yunsheng, the commander of the reconnaissance battalion, and asked, "Are there any Mongolian tribesmen around here?" "There should be some, but they are all individual households. There is only one or a few households within a few hundred miles. We really can't let the army stay here." Su Yunsheng understood the meaning of the sixth young master and immediately gave an answer. "Well, there is not much food in the barracks. It will be enough to eat mutton every day. Inform everyone to prepare early tomorrow morning. After lunch, the army will set off and retreat to the first city." Yang Qindong nodded and gave the order to withdraw the army. After a total of 24 days, Yang Qindong finally returned to the first city with the army. It was different from the previous trip. This time, there were countless horses and sheep, as well as nearly 10,000 Mongolian tribesmen following the army. As soon as these people entered the city, they were handed over to the city lord, Yu Mian. Yang Qindong himself went straight to the wasteland that had been reclaimed. There is strength in numbers. The words of the great ancestor were true. With the efforts of Yu Mian and the joint efforts of the soldiers who stayed behind in the city, 2,000 acres of wasteland had been reclaimed outside the first city in just over 20 days. Looking at the flat ground and the straight trenches, Yang Qindong was very satisfied. Not bad, not bad, we can consider planting in a greenhouse. The weather on the grassland was colder than inland. It was not an exaggeration to say that the weather here was cold for half of the 12 months of the year. This also led to the fact that in such a climate, there was only one season of crops. The natural climate factors made the lives of the people who were still dependent on food difficult. It was something that was difficult to change. But because of the arrival of Yang Qindong, this was destined to change. Planting vegetables in a greenhouse was the first reform that he wanted to carry out. Whether it was an army or a country, it was fine. If they wanted stability, they must first be able to fill their stomachs. Otherwise, if they couldn't even eat, who would work with them, and risk their lives together? There was a saying that went, if there is a difficulty, you have to do it. If there is no difficulty, you have to create difficulties. What Yang Qindong wanted to do was to solve the difficulties together. Looking at the flat ground, Yang Qindong had enough confidence in his heart. He had sent a telegram to Cheking City before he went to the Mongol tribe in the north, asking them to make greenhouse tubes and plastic films according to his requirements. If he wanted to produce these things, it might be a problem in other places, but in Cheking City, they had already been invented and used in Cheking City. The technology was already mature. Once these things and seeds arrived, they could be built. 3 months later, when winter came, they should be able to eat fresh vegetables. This must be considered a pioneering work. Yang Qindong returned with the army. Not only that, but he also brought back a lot of captives. Just from this point of view, the Mongol army in the north should have been defeated. The mercenaries had defeated Agar Dorji and Sud Khan, which made them famous in this grassland. No one dared to look down on them, and no one dared to have any ideas about them. Just as everyone was thinking that autumn was about to pass and winter was about to arrive, the mercenaries should also become obedient. Suddenly, everyone realized that the 2,000 acres of land that had just been reclaimed outside the beginning city had suddenly become lively. People who knew the climate here knew that this season was not suitable for planting any crops. Let's not talk about whether you could guarantee to protect the fruits of victory. In this kind of weather, everything would freeze to death. This was not allowed by the heavens. Who could go against the heavens? And at this time, the mercenaries actually wanted to do this against the heavens. How could it not surprise and amaze people? When the other forces nearby heard this news, their first thought was that the mercenaries were crazy. They would do a useless thing that would cost them a lot of money, but in the end, they would not gain anything. However, on the land outside the beginning city, Yu Mian did not think so. When he was in Jilin City, there were already greenhouse vegetables. However, because the climate there was not bad, there were no problems with crops for 2 seasons a year. Even if there were greenhouses, there were not many people who used greenhouses. However, it was not that there were none. On the contrary, he had gone to see it. Later, when he heard Yang Qindong say that he could try to plant greenhouses here, he felt that his mind was suddenly enlightened. He immediately sent a telegram to his father, Yu Qian, asking him for help to send more old farmers who had planted greenhouses to help the beginning city. Of course, Yu Qian would pay attention to his son's request for help. In addition, this was originally the intention of the 6th young master. Not long after, the first batch of 100 old farmers who had planted greenhouses came to the beginning city by boat with all kinds of materials. Then, they started to plant greenhouses here. It was only September, and the weather was still good. The greenhouses were only buried and vaguely formed. There was no plastic film covering them. Therefore, in the eyes of the locals, this move was a manifestation of the mercenaries' craziness. Knowledge could change one's fate and life. At that time, no one realized what kind of harvest the mercenaries would have 3 months later. You have to pay attention to the temperature when planting vegetables in the greenhouses. The plastic film is too thin. If the temperature outside is too low, the vegetables inside might freeze to death. You also have to pay attention to insect and pest prevention. Chapter 750. We have to solve the problem of ventilation and sunlight. Once it snows heavily, we have to clean it up in time. Not only can we let the sunlight shine, but we can't let the heavy snow collapse the greenhouse. Yang Qindong introduced his experience to Yu Mian and the 100 old farmers. Although these old farmers were veterans in planting crops, the climate in Crimson City was different from that of the first city. He still had to list out the things to take note of one by one. Yu Mian and the old farmers listened with shining eyes. They had nothing but admiration for Yang Qindong. This 6th young master acted as if there was nothing that he didn't know. Anything that was placed in front of him was no longer a problem. Yang Qindong left the matter of planting in the greenhouse to Yu Mian and these experienced old farmers. Instead, he turned around and focused his energy on military training. As mentioned before, the weather in the grasslands would be cold for nearly half a year. How could the army get used to fighting in the cold weather? This was the focus of military training. Send a message to Crimson City and ask them to make more military cotton coats and light down jackets. Tell them that the quality must be good. If anyone dares to use inferior cotton to make up the numbers, they will bring their heads to see me. Yang Qindong said to Beta Persei, who was following beside him. He still remembered that such a thing had happened to the national army. In the cold weather, the soldiers wore cotton-padded clothes made of cotton without cotton and inferior black cotton. In the end, who knew how many people had frozen to death and frostbite? Such a mistake could never happen to him. If anyone dared to do so, they would be waiting to die. Inform Crimson City to make some hot water belts. Make sure that everyone has one. Didn't I tell them that the frostbite cream I gave them last time was already developed? Then, mass produce it. All the anti-cold items should also be prepared. Yang Qindong listed out a bunch of items. This was what it meant to prepare for a rainy day. Opportunities were always given to those who were prepared, and you had to be prepared. In the first city, preparations were also being made to welcome the arrival of winter. One after another, fireplaces were built by Wu Hua and the other blacksmiths, and installed in the homes of the common people. What was worth being happy about was that Yang Qindong also found an underground coal mine not far from the first city according to his memory. Once he had this thing, it would not be difficult to keep warm in winter. At that time, the people here would go through their first warm winter together. It would be a very pleasant and joyful thing. Datong Military Headquarters. As Bai Ming's first line of defense against Walla's army, Commander Sun Hong felt a lot of pressure. He had sent letters to Bai Ming's capital 5 times to request for reinforcements. While complaining about the bad situation, he also requested the imperial court to send reinforcements. On the surface, they were constantly writing memorials asking for help, but in their hearts, they were cursing Shi Heng's nephew Shi Biao's 8 generations of ancestors. If it weren't for this person's insatiable greed, which eventually disrupted the cooperation between Bai Ming's business group and Walla, how could the border be tense and the flames of war be raging? When he thought that the Walla's army led by Yeshen had occupied the Hetao area and could attack Datong's mansion at any time, Sun Hong couldn't help but have an impulse to pull out his sword and kill people. It was just that now Shi Heng was deeply trusted by Zhu Qiyu. He had changed from Wuqing Count to Wuqing Marquis, and at the same time, he was also the commander of Bai Ming. He was in charge of all the military affairs and was already Sun Hong's superior. This suddenly made Sun Hong feel a sense of powerlessness. And just when Hetao had become Walla's possession and it seemed that Datong's mansion would face a war at any time and might even be lost at any time, the other party suddenly stopped. The domineering Walla suddenly became so honest, which was naturally beyond Sun Hong's expectation. At first, he suspected that the other party was preparing for a war, or even preparing to transfer more Walla cavalry to participate in the war. But when he sent out all the scouts, the news he received was the opposite. Not only did Yeshen not increase the troops in the direction of Datong, but he sent a part of the cavalry to defend the Mongolian area in the northeast. Could it be that something happened on the grassland again? Or was Tuachuo Buhua making a comeback? Sun Hong was naturally clear about the matter of Yeshen cooperating with Agar Dorji to deal with Tuachuo Buhua. It was precisely because he was clear that he thought so. Therefore, he sent out some scouts to further places to gather information. More than 2 months after this person was sent out, he finally returned with news. The answer turned out to be that the Duke of Loyalty suddenly appeared on the grassland and built a first city. He continuously fought with Agar Dorji and Mabe Mongol and won both. Sun Hong was originally the deputy chief of Datong and had always been guarding the border. He had only heard of the Duke of Loyalty but had never met him. But he had heard a lot about his glorious achievements. He also knew that although this person was young, his talent in business was amazing, especially when it came to leading troops to war. He was actually outstanding among people. Previously, when Bai Ming's capital was in danger, it was he who brought a few mercenaries and some people from the capital's 5 cities' warden's office to defeat the powerful Walla cavalry. Later, he also made Yeshen give in and the two sides had business relations, which bought a lot of time for Bai Ming's development. Later, there was a rebellion in the south of the southern Ming dynasty, and it was this Duke of Loyalty who not only stopped and eliminated the rebellion, but also took down 2 small countries, Jiaozhi and Lansang, and established a province there. This action was clearly to establish the power of an independent country. It was said that this action made many officials in the court furious. Many memorials were sent, but in the end, it was like a stone sinking into the sea. Regarding this, Sun Hong could understand. After all, Jiaozhi and Lansang were too far away from Bai Ming. If they wanted to send troops to eliminate them, they would have to pass through the southern Ming dynasty. How could Zhu Qiyu agree? Not to mention, even if they did send troops, it was still unknown whether they could defeat the mercenaries. The turmoil in the south made Bai Ming feel like it was sitting on pins and needles, but there was nothing it could do. It had to be said that this Duke of Loyalty was amazing. However, he did not expect that he would suddenly appear in the grasslands again. In such a short period of time, he had made such a big name there. No one dared to underestimate him. Of course, after understanding and knowing all this, Sun Hong was still somewhat happy. He was only a chief of the Datong army. Although he controlled the military power of 50,000 soldiers, he was still a martial artist. It was difficult for him to enter the eyes of those sage-like officials in the court. In his eyes, there was only the 3 acres of land in front of him. As long as Datong was safe, it was equivalent to him completing his duty. The appearance of the Duke of Loyalty could intimidate Walla's troops, which was beneficial to him. This was enough. Sun Hong was happy, but such important news still needed to be reported to the court. He immediately wrote a memorial and sent it to Bai Ming's capital. Not long after, Bai Ming also sent a decree. The decree was directly sent to Sun Hong and the guarding eunuch, Zhang Quan. Zhang Quan was a eunuch. During the coup of Tumu, the previous guarding eunuch, Guo Jing, died in battle. He was sent here to replace him. Compared to Sun Hong, this person had a close relationship with many eunuchs in Baiming's capital. If one had to say that he had a relationship with the higher-ups, Sun Hong was probably more than one level lower. When the decree was issued, the general idea was for Sun Hong and Zhang Quan to find a way to contact the Duke of Loyalty and ask him to contribute to Baiming's border chaos. If possible, they should even hand over the origin city to the Great Ming Dynasty's army. They should even hand over the military power of the mercenaries there. After reading the emperor's decree, Sun Hong and Zhang Quan both shook their heads. Who was the Duke of Loyalty? How could he be so easy to get along with? Did they really think that he was an ordinary official of the Great Ming Dynasty? Just based on the fact that he was able to defeat Agar Dorji's 50,000 cavalry and force the Mongol cavalry to cross the Yinma River, just based on these 2 points, how could they be willing to submit to others? Just based on the fact that the Datong government only had 50,000 soldiers, how could they make the other party bow their heads, let alone make them hand over their military power? Sun Hong did not have a better idea, and Zhang Quan also had the same idea. The scholars of the Ming dynasty were very united, and the important officials would sometimes work together for their own interests, often forcing the emperor to give in. Under such circumstances, the development of the eunuchs was inevitable. In order to maintain the balance, both Zhu Qizhen and Zhu Qiyu chose the same method, which was to promote and use the eunuchs to suppress the development of the scholars. Under such circumstances, the authority of the eunuchs became more and more important, to the point where few officials dared to not give them face. Even in the Great Tong Prefecture, Sun Hong still had to look at the face of the eunuch Zhang Quan. Eunuchs were a great threat to ordinary officials, but there were also exceptions. For example, the Duke of Loyalty, Yang Qindong, was the most typical example. It was said that when he first became the Duke of Loyalty, any eunuch who dared to call himself the Duke would be dealt with by Yang Qindong, the real Duke. After that, the eunuch group could not do anything to him. Just based on this point, Zhang Quan's power was not in the eyes of the other party at all. Sun Hong sighed, and so did Zhang Quan. Both of them had a sad look on their faces, but since the emperor had given the decree, they had to complete it. In the end, after thinking about it, Zhang Quan decided to go to Shi City. He wanted to see the situation there with his own eyes, so he could give an explanation to the higher-ups. Sun Hong was naturally happy that Zhang Quan was willing to go. He immediately decided to send Xianhu Su Dei and his men to escort him all the way to ensure his safety. Immediately, a cavalry team of more than 1,000 people left Great Tong and went all the way to the northeast. Zhang Quan came. Whether it was to find out the truth or to find out the truth, Yang Qindong did not care too much for the time being. One of the main reasons why Shi City had to be built was to shock the Baiming imperial court. Chapter 751. The establishment of Vietnam and Laos was indirectly tantamount to a falling out with Baiming and Southern Ming. Anyone with a clear head could see his ambition. They just didn't want to act rashly because of the strength he had shown. In the eyes of others, this was enough to be proud of, but in Yang Qindong's eyes, it was far from enough. He didn't forget that there were still 2 madams in Baiming's capital. Back then, they were there to be hostages so that the emperor of Baiming, Zhu Qiyu, wouldn't suspect him. Moreover, his brothers and sisters were all in the capital of the Northern Ming dynasty. Normally, he couldn't see the existence of these people, but if he really did tear off all pretense of cordiality, they might become his weak points. The Security Bureau had already sent a message. Whether it was the immortal abode in the capital, the residences of his brothers and sisters in heaven beyond heaven, or even the Yang family manor 15 li south of the city, the embroidered uniform guard spies could often be seen. They were watching these people to send a message to Yang Qindong: don't go too far. Otherwise, these family members could be in trouble at any time. With these embroidered uniform guards watching, Yang Qindong couldn't send all his family members out of Baiming's capital at the same time. For the safety of his family members and to give Baiming enough deterrence, Yang Qindong chose to build a city in the northeast of Baiming, which was the origin city. This place wasn't like the south of Southern Ming, where there were countries big and small for him to conquer and form enough influence. Since this was the case, he would build a new city here and have a force to threaten Baiming's imperial court so that they wouldn't dare to do anything to his family members. The establishment of the origin city didn't go against Yang Qindong's original intention when he came here. Its construction and existence had effectively deterred Wara. According to the Security Bureau, Yes Hen had become much more well-behaved. After occupying the Hetao region, he did not launch an attack on Datong Prefecture. He had achieved his initial strategic goal, which was to maintain the balance between Baiming and the grassland tribes. Now, what he needed to do was to make the first city even more powerful so that no one or any force would dare to have any ideas about it. As long as the origin city existed for a day, it would form a great deterrence to all the surrounding forces. As time passed, this deterrence would achieve the goal of subduing the enemy without fighting. At least, it would be much easier to deal with than before. This was a relationship that complemented each other. The development of the first city had become the most important thing in Yang Qindong's eyes. Of course, building and developing the first city was only the first step. Next, Yang Qindong needed to do more things, such as continue to expand his territory and influence. In order to achieve the huge goal of the Han people walking at the top of the world in the future, whether it was Baiming or Southern Ming, Yang Qindong had no intention of conquering by force now. It was even possible that he would have to avoid large-scale attacks in the future. However, when it came to the land outside of northern Ming, he didn't have so many concerns. The problem was, if he wanted to expand, who should he choose as his next military target? After thinking about it, Yang Qindong's gaze fell on the northeast, on the land of Russia ruled by the Golden Horde. The Golden Horde was one of the few remaining Golden Horde families with the purest bloodline in the Mongolian forces. If he could take them down, whether it was to expand his power or to deter them, it would be of great significance. Think about it, even the Golden Horde of Mongolia was defeated by the mercenaries. In a psychological sense, wouldn't the mercenaries be invincible? There was another important reason that made Yang Qindong make this decision. After more than 200 years of development, the current Golden Horde was no longer as strong as before. Now was the time to go downhill. According to the development of history, even if he didn't make a move, the Golden Horde would be destroyed by the rising power of Russia in less than 20 years. Since that was the case, there was nothing to worry about. Taking advantage of the situation was the best time to take action. In order to achieve the goal of severely injuring or even destroying the Golden Horde, Yang Qindong had already begun to formally consider which army would set off from the first city for the expedition. Logically speaking, the best person to lead an expedition was himself. In his previous life, he had been there countless times in order to complete missions, so he was very familiar with the language there. He also had a better grasp of some of the situation and terrain there compared to others. However, the first city had just been built and hadn't experienced the test of a cold winter. He was really worried about going far away now. In addition, the expeditionary army had just set off and had to travel thousands of miles to fight the enemy. It would take a long time to achieve success. Even if he went now, he might not be able to achieve success immediately. It was better to send other troops first. They could explore the path and also take the opportunity to find the shortcomings of the army. But even if he sent troops, facing a huge monster like the Golden Horde, the strength of the troops sent was not enough. It would just be a joke. After thinking about it, Yang Qindong decided to send the 3 divisions of the Cold Front to the front line. The 3 divisions of the Cold Front mainly used the 95 style. They also had the steel crossbow, which was a sharp weapon in close combat. The individual quality of the soldiers was also very good. They were Yang Qindong's trump card in the north. In addition, the division commander Wu Sheng and the political commissar Chen Bo had been working together for a long time. The strengths and advantages of the two could complement each other. It was enough to ensure that they would calmly deal with problems under any circumstances and would not be rash. No matter how one looked at it, they were the most suitable candidates to be sent to battle. Of course, the 3 divisions of the Cold Front were not enough. There was also the Nuzhan Cavalry Division. In addition, the number of troops reached 10,000. Only then would they be able to deal with the encirclement and siege of some large armies. The reason why he sent the Nuzan cavalry division and not other cavalry divisions was because of the Golden Horde. That was because the so-called Mongol Golden family brought a lot of pressure to the Mongol army. However, when facing the priestess, the pressure would be reduced to the minimum. On the contrary, because of the many years of suppression, the two sides were like fire and water. Only by sending the Nuzan cavalry division would they be able to unleash more combat power. To them, this could be considered a battle of revenge. How could they not use their full strength? After making the decision, Yang Chendong began to personally train the three divisions of the Cold Front and the Nuzan cavalry division. In particular, he gave some advanced guidance on how to fight in cold weather and heavy snow. He even took out the skis. The skis that he made himself were put to use at the end of October, the beginning of November, when the first snow fell on the plains. Yang Chendong stepped on the skis and walked on the snow. His light posture and extreme speed stunned everyone. First, there was the appearance of the bicycle. The sixth young master was the one who rode it the fastest. Next, the skis were invented and demonstrated by the sixth young master. This made everyone respect Yang Chendong even more. In their hearts, they wanted to ask, was there anything in this world that their sixth young master could not do? In the land of ice and snow, with skis, the army could move faster. Not only that, when another batch of supplies arrived, many white cloaks appeared. Yang Chendong put them on, and his entire person seemed to blend into the white snow in an instant. These cloaks were not as big and eye-catching as the cloaks worn by officers above the regiment level. However, they could be used to hide one's figure and were the best disguise. If the enemy did not keep an eye on them and did not have information beforehand, they would not be able to see them even if they slipped under their noses. Alright, you have the equipment. You can train with it now. When you are done training and the army departs, I, the young master, will personally send you off. Yang Chendong patted Wu Sheng, Chen Bo, and the others on the shoulders before turning around and walking out of the training ground. Wu Sheng and Chen Bo were both very excited about Yang Chendong's favor and the fact that they were allowed to lead their troops into battle alone. Speaking of which, from the 3rd Regiment to the 3rd Division of the Cold Front, they had always been by Yang Chendong's side. Rather than saying that they had won every battle, it was more accurate to say that it was the 6th young master's good command and battle plans. Now, the fledglings could finally fly freely in the sky. How could the two of them not be excited? This did not mean that they did not want to be under Yang Chendong's command anymore. It was just that they wanted to prove their abilities. There was already news that the Cold Front was considering forming an army. It was very likely that the first army would be built in the rear headquarters, Qiqian City. The first commander would also be Leng Song, the former commander of the 1st Division. Since they were going to form an army, both Wu Sheng and Chen Bo would not be limited to the position of a division commander and political commissar. They also wanted to take a step forward and become a commander from a division commander. In order to achieve this goal, they would need to put in more effort and gain more military merits. Only when they were free to command in battle would they be able to unleash their full potential. In order to achieve this goal, Yang Chendong had just left the training ground when Wu Sheng's voice rang out. Train hard, train as hard as you can. Try to familiarize yourself with using skis as soon as possible and make a name for yourself. Yang Chendong did not need to worry about the enthusiasm of the army's training. Not long after leaving the training ground, he arrived at the greenhouse base. More than 2 months had passed. When it was first built, it was still early autumn. But now, it was already early winter. When the surroundings were covered by snow, the vegetable greenhouse base was indeed a scene of exuberant green. It was said that no matter how busy City Lord Yumian was, he would take the time to come here and take a look. It was as if his mood would become very good after seeing it. Yang Chendong would also come here every few days to see the results of his guidance. With the addition of 100 experienced farmers and some technical guidance from Yang Chendong, the green greenhouse base was developing smoothly. The moment they entered, their eyes were filled with green, giving them a feeling of joy of a harvest. Chapter 752. Sixth young master, we've calculated. In about half a month, some of the vegetables will be ripe and ready to be served on the table. When the experienced old farmer who stayed here saw Yang Chendong come to inspect again, he said as if he was showing off his merit. Hee, good. Yang Chendong nodded in satisfaction. Looking at the patches of green in front of him, he was as happy as looking at piles of gold. It was not an exaggeration to say that the value of green vegetables in this place was not much different from gold. At this time in the past, other than the mutton that the people of the grassland ate all year round, most of the vegetables that were buried deep in the cellar, such as radishes and cabbages. Of course, because of Yang Chendong's appearance, there was now an additional potato. But no matter what, with only these few vegetables being exchanged, there would be a time when people would get tired of eating them. Now that these various varieties of green vegetables could be taken out, there was no need to worry about the sales even if they were sold at a high price. The only thing to consider was the lack of ingredients and the lack of supply. Unknowingly, Yu Mian also appeared in the greenhouse base with a face full of excitement. When he saw that Yang Chendong was also here, he almost jogged all the way over. Sixth young master, you're really amazing. Hee, don't flatter me. Yang Chendong smiled at Yu Mian. This is not flattery, these are sincere words. If you don't believe me, you can go to the city and listen to what the people in the city say. They all see you as a god, as someone sent by Chang Tian. Yu Mian's words were not exaggerated. After seeing the progress of the greenhouse base, he deliberately arranged for 100 people in the city to enter the greenhouse base to observe every day. It was the appearance of these 100 people every day that turned their surprise into excitement. Then, under the word of mouth, the appearance of the greenhouse base, as well as Yang Chendong, who was the mastermind, began to be infinitely exaggerated. Until now, many people outside had said that Yang Chendong was someone sent by the everlasting heaven to help them. As a direct result, more and more commoners joined the first city, reaching nearly 50,000 people. To be able to grow from nothing to nearly 50,000 people in the grasslands in just 3 or 4 months was not as simple as it seemed. It was truly a miracle, an unprecedented feat. There weren't many people on the prairie to begin with, and each of them had their own tribes. It wasn't easy to gather everyone together. Even if you had a powerful armed force, it would be difficult to do so. After all, everyone lived far apart. No matter how powerful you were, you could always hide if you couldn't beat them. But now, these people came to the first city of their own accord. The streets in the city were so spacious, neat, and hygienic. When they walked into the house, it was cold outside, but the room was as warm as spring after the fireplace was burning. The greenhouse was green as if it was midsummer. The cavalry outside the city was full of fighting spirit, and their morale was like a song. The major restaurants in the city had opened, and sometimes, they could see some programs that praised the grassland people's strength to face life and the mercenary army's bravery to kill the enemy. All of these really injected a warm current into the cold weather, and it went straight into people's hearts, making everyone really like this place. Sixth young master, you're right to transfer some of the female soldiers from Chichen City. It's funny that I opposed it before, afraid that these young and beautiful female soldiers would appear here and cause some chaos. Now, it seems that I didn't see the big picture enough and didn't observe things clearly enough. Whenever they performed, the restaurant would be filled to the brim. This was especially true for the newly built Immortal Abode, which was the largest restaurant in the city. Whenever the female soldiers performed, it would be even more difficult to get a seat. Thus, they had to pay quite a bit of business tax to the origin city. This made him, as the city lord, even more confident in doing things. Yu Mian sighed with emotion. Well, you're right about this. The construction of spiritual civilization is also an indispensable part of people's lives. What is happiness? It's not as simple as having enough to eat and clothes to wear. It should be more reasonable and have higher goals. Yang Chendong nodded and said a few words that made Yu Mian feel as if he had obtained a treasure. Yu Mian kept nodding and even took out a pen and paper from his body as if he was performing magic. When he saw that Yang Chendong seemed to have finished speaking, he asked for instructions again. Sixth young master, it's winter now, and most of the people don't have anything to do. Especially after seeing the prosperity of the city, they feel that their pockets are flat and embarrassed. Some of the young and strong people are asking to join the army even louder. They have people blocking the entrance of the city lord's mansion every day. What should we do? After everything in the first city was on the right track, Yang Chendong gave the newly built city lord's mansion to Yu Mian for his office, changing the original city lord's mansion to the Yang mansion. The people respected Yang Chendong and didn't dare to find trouble with Yang Chendong. However, when they went to the city lord's mansion, they didn't feel any burden. Sometimes, when he wanted to go out of the mansion to do things, he had to go through the side door or the back door. Listening to Yu Mian complaining, Yang Chendong nodded after hesitating for a while. With so many young and strong people having nothing to do, it was inevitable that there would be various problems after a long time. At this time, the first city must not be in chaos. Such a good situation couldn't be changed by internal chaos. How about this? We can consider recruiting. The 3 divisions of the Langfeng Division and the Nuzhen Cavalry Regiment will soon go to the north. The first city's military strength will become empty. Appropriate recruitment can also make up for our own shortcomings. However, even if we recruit, we can't use all of them. Consider setting up 3 new divisions first. I will arrange for Tiger's Mane to do the specific things. You just need to post the notice and let the people in the city know. By the way, there should be many women in the city who have nothing to do, right? Yes. When Yu Mian heard that they could recruit, he was overjoyed. When he heard Yang Chendong ask about the women at home, he felt that there must be something behind it. He immediately said, usually, at this time, they can graze in the place they choose. However, when they enter the first city, they sell their livestock to us. A very small number of them are kept together and implement the common grazing policy. Now, more and more women are idle at home. It will be a hidden danger after a long time. Set up a textile bureau and let these women make clothes. I will send a telegram to the Red City and ask them to send the raw materials over. Also, send some experienced weavers. Although the money won't be much, it should be enough to support the family. We can also consider recruiting some young, beautiful, and versatile Mongolian women to join the propaganda team in the city. I have heard that Mongolian women are very good at dancing. Also, some programs are performed by the Mongolians themselves. It is more unique and easier to convince people. After coming up with so many ideas, Yu Mian wrote them down one by one in his notebook. Then, he hurriedly left the greenhouse base. He wanted to implement these things immediately. He believed that the people in the city would be very happy. This would also be of great help to him, the city lord, to stabilize the situation in the city. Yu Mian moved very quickly. Not long after he returned to the city lord's mansion, the notice was written and posted at the gate. This news quickly spread throughout the city. Many people were excited and encouraged by it. In a row of newly built houses in the east of the city, a pair of young men had just heard the news and were excited. "Child, what's wrong? Could it be that the messenger of immortal heaven brought some pioneering work? How can you be happy?" The person who spoke was a middle-aged woman. From her appearance, it could be seen that she must be an extremely beautiful person when she was young. At this time, wrinkles had begun to appear on her face. However, her eyes were still bright and full of spirit. With her facial features, she gave people a very amiable feeling. This woman's name was Ba Dama. In Chinese, it meant lotus. When she was young, she was a famous beauty. Later on, she married a very brave man and gave birth to a daughter, Kikij, and a son, Ba Tuesday. Originally, this was a happy family of 4. When Ba Tu was old enough, he could sell some of his sheep and horses to raise money for his son to marry a wife. However, there was an unexpected storm. During one of their herding, a group of 4 scouts under Walla Yeshen accidentally came to their door. They took a fancy to the young and beautiful Kikij and wanted to kidnap her. At the crucial moment, as the head of the family, Batu's father stood up. He held a rusty cavalry sword and fought with the enemy. Using this opportunity, Ba Dama brought her children and escaped on horseback. Ba Tu's father killed one enemy and injured two others. In the end, the cavalry sword in his hand broke and he died of exhaustion. The horses and sheep in the family were also swept away. When Ba Dama brought her children back to the herding land, only her father's body was left. The happy family became a tragedy. After losing their sheep and horses, Ba Dama left her hometown with her underage son and daughter. They walked and stopped all the way and even had to eat. In the end, they heard about the matter in the first city and came here to settle down. At this time, it had been 3 years since his father was killed. Ba Tu had grown up into a young man. Kikij was very beautiful and outstanding. However, after 3 years of running, the old mother, Ba Dama, finally collapsed from exhaustion. If Kikij and Ba Tu had not gone to the mercenary hospital in the city to ask for help, her mother would not have been able to hold on until now. The matter of Ba Tu's family was seen by some neighbors who also came to the first city to make a living and yearned for a new life. Those who had money and those who had things gave them a lot of help. There was even a wealthy Mongolian family who wanted to marry Kikij as a concubine and took out 200 taels of silver as a betrothal gift. However, he was directly rejected by Ba Dama. In her words, her children were eagles and jade rabbits on the grassland. They should not lower their heads for anything. They could earn everything with their own hands. Chapter 753. It was easy to say. The marriage was rejected because Ba Dama wanted to find a better family for her children. However, the hard days had to continue. As the only man in the family, Ba Tu went out early every morning to dig coal. It was this move that allowed the family to barely survive in the first city. However, with the arrival of winter, many things in the city had to stop. The work of digging coal was not as easy as before. They wanted to find another way, but how difficult was it to find a job? Ba Tu even tried to work as a waiter in some restaurants. However, because he was tall and strong, it was useless. The reason given was that the waiter in the restaurant was too powerful and would easily scare the customers. Days passed. If this continued, the family would not be able to supply the coal. Even the last warm place would be lost. What's more, they would not be able to afford the rent and would probably be kicked out of the first city, the City of Hope. Suddenly, a recruitment notice was posted outside the city lord's mansion, as well as the recruitment of 200 young and beautiful girls and the textile bureau in the city. Finally, the city recruited soldiers. This made Ba Tu see hope in despair. How could he not be happy? Sister Kikij also heard about the establishment of the textile bureau. She was also very excited. She could support the family with her hands and earn money to treat her mother's illness. This family should be getting better and better. No. Sister, you shouldn't go to the textile bureau. Instead, you should go to the publicity team. Do you still remember that father praised your beautiful dancing more than once? When he heard that his sister was going to the textile bureau to sign up, Ba Tu immediately stopped her. Ah. Can I do it? Kikij said with some lack of confidence. You can do it. At this moment, not only Ba Tu, but even her mother, Ba Dama, said at the same time. Ba Dama looked at her daughter with the loving and kind eyes of a mother and said, Kikij, Ba Tu, you are in a good era. You can do it. You can. Your father's spirit in heaven will bless you. The confident eyes of her mother and brother made Kikij have an idea. She gathered her courage and said, well, I will give it a try. If it really doesn't work, I will go to the textile bureau to find a job. Kikij didn't have much confidence. Even though she was very beautiful, she didn't dare to have any hope for anything lucky. However, happiness suddenly fell on her head, making her feel as if she hadn't woken up yet. There weren't many people signing up for the publicity office in the city. Perhaps there were too many people like Kikij who didn't have confidence in themselves. This allowed her to gain quite a bit of advantage. With her appearance, she stood out among the line of people waiting to be assessed. Reality proved that her luck wasn't bad. She caught the eye of the head of the propaganda department, Shui Qing. Shui Qing was originally a female official in Crimson Nest City's Inchuan department and was highly valued by the department head, Wan Xiaoyu. This time, when he learned that it was the sixth young master who had personally given the order, he immediately sent out his trusted subordinate. Reality proved that Shui Qing didn't disappoint. After coming to the beginning city, she quickly understood what had happened here. Then, she chose some of the most representative stories and arranged them into a program. Once it was performed, there were a lot of good reviews. It also gave the publicity office a good start. All the work quickly entered the right path. The degree of popularity was unexpectedly good. There were more and more people in the army and among the common people who wanted to watch their program. However, the manpower in the publicity office was limited. Just when Shui Qing was thinking about whether to ask for support from the headquarters in Crimson Nest City, the sixth young master spoke. He gave them the authority to recruit 200 people to join the publicity office. This was equivalent to solving her problem. In order to complete this task well and not let down the sixth young master, Shui Qing personally acted as the examiner and recruited these 200 people. With Kikij's beautiful appearance and her good dancing foundation that she had learned from her mother since she was young, she was chosen by Shui Qing and became a new member of the publicity office. When she found out that she had been chosen and that she would be able to receive a salary of 10 taels of silver every month, and that if she performed well, there would be even more rewards, Kikij was so happy that she shed tears. She turned around and ran out. She wanted to tell this good news to her mother and brother and share it with the family. Perhaps it was because Kikij was too happy that she ran too fast. When she rushed out of the door, she didn't look at anyone or anything and bumped into a man's embrace. She couldn't help but let out a delicate cry. This wasn't because Kikij was too weak and delicate. It was because his chest was too broad and too sturdy. It was like a wall, making her feel as if a meat bump had grown on her head. "What's wrong with you? Don't you look at the road when you're running?" A reprimanding voice sounded. The one who spoke was one of the strong man's followers. "I'm sorry. I was too anxious. I apologize." Kikij also knew that it was because she was too anxious and reckless that she bumped into someone, even though she might be the one who was injured. But the past few years of experience had made her used to swallowing her anger. As she spoke, in order to show her respect, Kikij took the initiative to raise her head when she said, "I apologize." This allowed her to see the person she bumped into. This person was about 1.9 meters tall and weighed about 200 kilograms. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that he was as tall as a horse. But as soon as she raised her head, Kikij immediately lowered her head, as if she didn't have the courage to look at him. She could only see the rough outline of the other party, but when she raised her head, the other party saw her clearly. So beautiful. This was the only thought in the tall man's heart. Although this woman's looks aren't as good as the other madams, she's much better than the others. Especially with her tear-stained face, it's easy for people to feel pity for her. Beta Persei, who was standing there, couldn't help but think in his heart. The person who came was Beta Persei. Yang Chendong considered that today was the recruitment day of the publicity department and wondered if anyone would come here to cause trouble. After all, there were only girls here, and it wouldn't be good if they were scared. Thus, he sent Beta Persei over to take a look. With this person here, no one would dare to cause trouble here. Unexpectedly, as soon as Beta Persei arrived, Kikij bumped into him. His skin was rough and his flesh was thick, so of course, nothing happened to him. But Kikij actually cried, which made Beta Persei feel a little embarrassed. After apologizing, Kikij didn't hear Beta Persei's response and wanted to leave. Anyway, she had already apologized. The other party was a man, so he wouldn't make things difficult for her. It was said that snatching beauties often happened in other places, but it had never been heard of in the first city, which was ruled by law. This was also the reason why her mother dared to firmly reject the neighbor who wanted to take her as a concubine. Kikij wanted to leave, and her feet involuntarily walked to the side. However, an outstretched arm blocked her. The person who stopped her was none other than Beta Persei. When he saw the other party crying, he thought that he was the one who caused it, so he wanted to apologize. Ah! What are you doing? If you continue like this, I'm going to shout for help. A big hand blocked her way, scaring Kikij so much that her whole body was about to shrink into a ball. She was already thinking about whether she should return to the publicity department. She remembered that director Shuei Qing seemed to have a good impression of her. I'm fine. I just want to ask why you're crying. Did I cause it? Well, I've been practicing martial arts all year round, so my body is a little too strong. It must have hurt you. Beta Persei faced Kikij and said incoherently. He didn't know how long it had been since he felt this way. Even when facing Yang Chendong, Beta Persei could answer smoothly most of the time and smile as usual. But for some reason, facing a strange girl today, he actually felt a little flustered. I'm fine. Can you please move aside? After Kikij heard Beta Persei's words, she knew that he was not a bad person. But that was all. She still had urgent things to do, such as going home to report the good news. Oh. Beta Persei heard that Kikij was fine, so he put his hands down. But before the other party was about to walk past him, he suddenly straightened his arms and said, Miss, my name is Beta Persei. If you feel unwell or have other troubles, you can come to the Yang Mansion to find me. I can do my best to help. Yang Mansion? When she heard this name, Kikij finally couldn't help but raise her head again. There was no one in the beginning city who didn't know where the Yang Mansion was. It was the place where the great Ming dynasty's Duke of Loyalty and the Messenger of Tingri Heaven stayed. Those who could live there gave people a sense of mystery. She didn't expect this man to stay there. Kikij raised her head again, and Beta Persei saw her clearly again. Beautiful, you're beautiful. This was Beta Persei's second impression. Kikij seemed to feel that Beta Persei's gaze was a little hot, so she lowered her head again. Thank you for your concern. I'm fine. Can I leave now? Oh, yes. Beta Persei really had no reason to stop the other party, so he had to take a step back and make enough space for Kikij to trot past him. Kikij had already left, but Beta Persei's gaze was still following her. When the figure could no longer be seen, Captain Dao Zhao's voice sounded beside him. Brother Beta Persei, she's gone. If you like, I'll send my brothers to follow her and see where she lives. What's her name? Forget it. Being teased by his brothers, Beta Persei couldn't help but blush. He then shook his head and strode into the door of the publicity office. Although he didn't send anyone to inquire about Kikij, Beta Persei still paid attention to it because he found that the girl's figure always appeared in his mind from time to time, and he couldn't let it go. Fortunately, he didn't forget what the mission was this time. He quickly entered the publicity office and came to the recruitment site. Chapter 754. As soon as he entered, his bulky figure quickly attracted the attention of many people. Director Shuei Qing also saw Beta Persei at the first moment and hurriedly came over to greet him. This was the person beside the sixth young master, and he was also a popular person. He absolutely could not be offended. Brother Beta Persei, why do you have time to inspect our small yamen? Shuei Qing walked over with a smile on her face. Originally, she wanted to call Beta Persei master, just like how the people in Crimson City called Jianghu. However, after someone called Beta Persei that way, he was scolded. What a joke, the sixth young master was only a duke, how dare they call him master? For this matter, he personally sent a telegram to Yang Wu in Crimson City, severely criticizing him. Yang Wu was also somewhat wronged. He did not request to be called Master Yang Wu, but the people below took the initiative to call him Master Yang. However, even with Beta Persei's angry reprimand, Yang Wu also asked everyone in Crimson City to call him Yang Wu in the future. If not, they could call him Brother Yang Wu. Anyway, Master Yang Wu was not allowed. Whoever called him that could only be punished. After seeing Shui Qing, Beta Persei also asked with a smile on his face with concern, "How is it? Is everything normal here? Did anyone come to make trouble?" "Why would anyone come to make trouble? This is the beginning city. Are the patrols that can be seen casually on the streets useless?" Shui Qing pursed her lips and chuckled. Beta Persei also chuckled. The safety of the beginning city had always been the most important. Even if it had begun to snow, the security and defense of the city was still the same as usual. Every 10 minutes or so, a patrol of at least 10 people would appear on the streets. Not only that, the streets in the city had always been very clean. Even if the heavy snow was still falling, the snow that had covered the ground a moment ago would be swept out in the next moment. This showed how frequent the patrols were. The beginning city was surrounded by grasslands and was surrounded by Mongolians. The slightest carelessness might cause unknown things to happen. In order to achieve a deterrent effect, the patrols on the streets were more frequent. "By the way, how's the recruitment today? How many good seedlings are there?" Beta Persei didn't dwell on the issue of public security. Instead, he asked about the recruitment of the publicity department. Shui Qing knew that this was probably the sixth young master's intention. He wanted to find out more about them, so she answered truthfully, "The situation isn't too good. Although there are quite a lot of people here, most of them aren't in good condition, especially their skin. Perhaps it's because of the climate and environment, most of them are too rough and dark. I'm not discriminating against them, but since they're performing for everyone, they should at least look pleasing to the eyes. It's better to avoid those who don't look interesting at first glance." After saying this, Shui Qing made a gesture of touching her forehead. "Well, after being busy for more than an hour, we only found 3 good seedlings." After saying this, she handed a roster to Beta Persei. Due to their relationship with Yang Qindong, the people of Yang Xia were more used to using hours instead of hours when talking about time. However, they only found 3 suitable people in more than an hour. This was indeed a lot of pressure for the publicity department that had to recruit 200 students. Beta Persei pretended not to care and took a look at the roster. The name of the last of the 3 recruited people, Kikij, came into his eyes. "Chichigu, that's a nice name." He still asked as if he didn't know anything about it. It had to be said that after being by Yang Qindong's side for a long time, young heir had learned to do things in a roundabout way. He had also learned some methods. If it was in the past, he might have directly asked questions. "Yes." Speaking of Kikij, Shui Qing seemed to be very interested. "I don't know how this girl takes care of herself. Her skin is good and she has a good dancing foundation. She's a talent that our publicity department urgently needs. You haven't seen her, but even if she wore the most simple clothes, you can still see that she's a delicate flower." Shui Qing said unintentionally, or rather, she said it as if she was showing off. When Tiger's Mane heard everything, he was even more certain that the girl he saw should be Kikij. This was because when he entered the big house, he observed that there were many girls who came and they were all dressed in colorful clothes. He thought that on such an occasion, they would wear the most beautiful clothes and leave the best first impression for others. Kikij did not wear any colorful clothes. Perhaps it was because of her personality, or perhaps that was the best she had. Unfortunately, Kikij was too happy. After knowing that she was chosen, she left in a hurry and did not even leave an address. This made Beta Persei unable to find out more even if he wanted to. Of course, with his identity, it was not impossible for him to find someone in the beginning city based on his name. However, that would be too much of a waste of manpower and material resources. Beta Persei did not want to be special. He thought that since this girl would come to work in the publicity department, as long as he had the heart, would he be afraid that he would not have the opportunity to see her? Beta Persei was still thinking about the next opportunity to meet Kikij when Kikij returned home in high spirits. However, as soon as she entered the room, she saw her brother, Batu, squatting on the ground and her mother, Badama, comforting him. "Batu, don't think too much. The mercenaries are doing this for your own good. Who asked you to have no brothers in the family? This is also for our family's sake. Badama said earnestly and reached out to stroke Batu's hair. She was undoubtedly a loving mother. What's going on? Kikij, who had a premonition, looked at her mother and brother and asked as she walked forward. Sister, they don't want me. They said that I'm the only son in the family. When Batu heard his sister's voice, he quickly raised his head. When he looked at Kikij, his eyes were full of grievances. If Batu's performance was not good enough and his physical fitness was not strong enough, it might still be sad, but it was also difficult for Batu to accept. However, he passed the basic physical fitness assessment and even got a good result in his equestrian performance. However, when they finally investigated his family's situation and learned that he was the only son, they directly rejected him. According to the mercenary examiner, it was too dangerous for the only son to go to the battlefield. They could not use the future of a family as an excuse. Logically speaking, these words were really for the sake of these Mongolian youths. The mercenaries didn't want to end the bloodline of these youths. After all, anything could happen on the battlefield, and the enemy wouldn't take extra care of you just because you were the only child of your clan. However, the situation of Batu's family needed to be changed urgently, especially his mother's illness. He had to find a way to treat it as soon as possible. If he could not join the army, what else could he do? Not to mention that he did not earn much from doing manual labor, it was already early winter. What else could he do? Batu was a filial child. He was anxious to rely on his own efforts to change his family. In his opinion, this was what an indomitable man should do. Kikij was also shocked by this statement. Her brother woke up very early today, even earlier than her sister who had to wake up to make breakfast. His eagerness to join the army was already very obvious. She originally thought that her brother was tall and strong. He would definitely be a good seedling if he joined the army. However, she did not expect that he would be rejected with such a reason. This was really unexpected. How about little brother not join the army? I have already been chosen to join the publicity department. In the future, I will have a salary of 10 taels of silver a month. Our family's situation will slowly change. The originally good news, now that it came out of Kikij's mouth, it did not seem that surprising anymore. Ah. Sister, have you been chosen? That's great. Batu, who was still squatting on the ground, was pleasantly surprised when he heard the news. However, he quickly lowered his head again. His sister could do things for the family, but he, a 7 feet tall man, could not do anything. This seemed to reflect his incompetence. Hearing that his daughter was chosen by the publicity department, Badama was also very happy. Good, I knew my daughter was the best. There's no problem. In any case, there was still good news. Badama actually said that he wanted to borrow some food from the neighbors to celebrate. Moreover, for the first time, she did not allow Kikij to interfere. In her words, her daughter's hands would be of great use in the future, so it was better not to do these manual labor. His mother went to work alone. Batu was in a bad mood. He returned to his room and covered himself with a blanket to sleep, leaving Kikij alone. However, her feelings were actually very complicated. She really wanted to help her brother. Just like the Han people, the Mongols also had the idea of valuing boys over girls. No matter how good a daughter was, she would eventually have to marry someone. Only when the man in her family had a promising future would he be able to bring real change to the family. The relationship between the two of them had been very good since they were young. As the elder sister, Kikij didn't want to see her younger brother depressed and upset. She would rather not be chosen than to see this scene happen. No, I have to help my brother. A firm voice rang out in his heart. Chichigu said that he had something to do and left the room. In her mind, she thought about what Beta Persei had said to her, if you have any problems, you can come to me. She decided to give it a try. No matter what, he was still in the Yang residence. It shouldn't be a problem for him to help her brother with this small matter. Beta Persei did not expect that while he was still thinking about Kikij in his heart, she would actually come to his door so quickly. He was still on duty by Yang Chendong's side. After reporting what he saw at the publicity office, he became a little absent-minded. With Yang Chendong's observation skills, he naturally noticed this, but he did not ask anything. He believed that if there was really something big, Beta Persei would definitely report to him. It was also at this time that the second guard captain, Dao Xiao, entered the room. Seeing the sixth young master sitting there reading a book, he carefully went to Beta Persei's side. Beta Persei, gee, someone is looking for you outside. It's a girl called Kikij. Chapter 755. Originally, Yang Er still looked listless. Looking at the situation, he wanted to ask who was looking for him, but when he suddenly heard Chi-Chi Ji's name, he didn't even report to Yang Chendong. Instead, he rushed out of the house and disappeared without a trace. What's going on? Yang Chendong noticed Beta Persei's abnormal behavior. He did not ignore it, but asked Dao Xiao, who seemed to know some inside information. Dao Xiao was not gossiping, but he had to answer the sixth young master's question. He immediately told him what happened in the morning at the entrance of the publicity office. He was very objective. He even reported what Beta Persei said to Shui Qing. Yang Chendong was smart. He immediately knew that Beta Persei had fallen in love with the girl called Kikij. Beta Persei was not young anymore, and Yang Chendong never stopped his subordinates from dating and getting married. There was even a period of time when he wanted to find a wife for Beta Persei. He did not expect that the opportunity would come to him. Since it had happened, he could not ignore it. After all, Beta Persei was someone close to him. If something happened, it would be a big deal. Go find Feng Liang. Tell him that I said it. I want to know more about Kikij, her family, and the people around her, Yang Chendong ordered Dao Xiao. Although it was a coincidence, and there should not be any problems with Kikij, things were unpredictable. Without investigation, there was no right to speak. Beta Persei did not know that Kikij's matter had attracted the sixth young master's attention. He only knew that the girl in his heart had appeared, and that was enough to make him excited. After running out of the room, Beta Persei quickly calmed down. First, he tidied up his clothes and found that there was nothing wrong. Then, he walked out of the Yang mansion's gate with steady steps. The sixth young master had said that the more important the matter was, the calmer one had to be in order to make the most accurate decision. Yang Er also learned to calm down, but when he went out and saw Kikij standing there with her head lowered, he was discouraged. He realized that his heartbeat was very disappointing. No matter how hard he tried to calm down, he couldn't calm his heart down. Perhaps Beta Persei was worried that the girl already had a husband. It's you, Kikij, right? My name is Beta Persei. No matter what kind of worries he had, Beta Persei decided to get to know her first. If she was not betrothed, then his chance had come. While introducing himself, he also extended an arm that represented friendship. Unfortunately, he did not get a response from Kikij. The other party was not used to this at all. Seeing Second Yang reach out his hand to her as soon as they met, she was shocked. Her whole body involuntarily stepped back, and her eyes revealed fear. She almost shouted, "What do you want to do?" Hee. Seeing that his actions were a little frightening, Beta Persei smiled foolishly and retracted his hand. He touched his head and broke the awkwardness by asking, "You must have something to tell me. Speak." Beta Persei extended his hand as soon as they met, which was not considered polite at the time. It made Kikij feel that she had found the wrong person. After all, that action was a little too frivolous. However, Beta Persei expressed his goodwill and asked if she had anything to tell him. This made Kikij hesitate for a while before she bit her lip and made up her mind. Our family has encountered a little problem and we would like to ask for your help, but I don't know if you can help. Beta Persei was delighted when he heard this. This was a good opportunity to understand Kikij's family. He would know what kind of person she was as soon as he went, so how could he refuse? As for his ability, there should not be many people in the beginning city who would not give him face. Beta Persei was of course full of confidence in the things he was good at. He patted his strong chest and said, I can still do ordinary things. Beta Persei's appearance seemed to give Kikij confidence. She really had no other choice. It seemed that among the people she knew, only Beta Persei seemed to have some status. Well, it's about my younger brother. His name is Batu. In the end, Kikij told Beta Persei about the family matters, but it was only limited to her younger brother. She did not tell him about her mother's illness and poor health. It was the first time they met, so it would be rude to tell him everything. Beta Persei listened carefully. At this time, he felt that Kikij's voice was so pleasant to the ear. Even though she was a little pouting when she spoke Chinese and was not even fluent, he felt that it was nice to hear. Perhaps this was what it meant by beauty is in the eye of the beholder. Kikij finished speaking very quickly, but when she saw that Beta Persei was still listening carefully, she could not help but ask anxiously, Are you listening? Oh, I'm listening. Beta Persei quickly returned to his body and nodded. The younger brother you mentioned has good physical fitness. He's already an adult, right? But because he's the only son in the family, he can't join the army, right? Yes, that's it. Do you have any ideas? After listening, Kikij's hopeful eyes fell on Beta Persei. Beta Persei enjoyed this kind of gaze very much, but he also felt a lot of pressure. This was the time to show his ability. If he did not perform well, he was afraid that there would be no chance for what would happen next. With Beta Persei's identity, if he greeted the conscription office, the problem of Batu joining the army would definitely be solved in the most appropriate way and even the best arrangements would be made. After all, he was one of the people around the sixth young master, so he definitely had some face. However, after following Yang Qindong for a long time, Beta Persei trusted his eyes more than his ears. He decided to take a look at Batu personally to see if he was really as tall and strong as Kikij said. Of course, no one knew if he would take this opportunity to understand Kikij's family situation. How about this, can I meet your brother? If he's really as good as you said, then I should be able to help. Beta Persei did not immediately make a promise. Instead, he wanted to understand the situation before making a decision. Kikij hesitated. She was not worried about Beta Persei's ability. After all, they were at the entrance of the Yang mansion, where he came from. Would the people around the god of war and the messenger of Tingri be bad people? She was only worried about the situation at home. For some reason, she did not want Beta Persei to see the situation at home. What's wrong? Is there a problem? Seeing that Kikij did not immediately agree, Beta Persei asked. Logically speaking, since he had agreed to help, the other party should be happy and should immediately lead the way. Could it be that there was something that was hard to say? Or was it that she was already married, and if she brought another man home, others would gossip about her? No problem. Kikij bit her lips again and said. Then, as if she had made some kind of decision, she said, I'll take you to my house to see my brother. In Kikij's heart, there was nothing more important than her brother's matter. Okay, wait for me. Beta Persei's heart also settled down. Then, he chuckled and turned to the sentinel standing guard at the entrance of the Yang mansion and said, Go and call out Ba Daojiang's group of brothers. Also, send someone to tell Captain Dao Xiao that I'm going out to handle some personal matters. As one of Yang Qindong's people, Beta Persei had to inform him wherever he went, even if it was not a matter of freedom. Of course, there was no need to report to Yang Qindong and disturb the sixth young master when he went out to handle some personal matters. However, someone in the mansion had to know. The sentinel was also a soldier of the guards. Seeing that it was Beta Persei who had spoken, he immediately agreed and turned to enter the mansion. Not long after, Ba Daojiang led 5 guards out of the mansion and came to Beta Persei's side. Ba Daojiang is ordered to lead the soldiers to report to Beta Persei. As soon as Ba Daojiang appeared, he saluted and said seriously. This was not Beta Persei putting on airs, but doing things according to the rules set by Yang Chendong. The rules required that no one was allowed to act alone when they went out. There had to be at least 4 to 6 people. This was also for their safety. Although the security in the first city seemed to be very good, this was a new city after all. There were many Mongolians in the city. If they were not careful, wouldn't they be asking for trouble if there were any losses? Ba Daojiang had a total of 6 people behind him. Beta Persei turned to look at Kikij and said in a gentle tone, "Okay, you lead the way." Seeing that second Yang was able to bring 6 soldiers with him just by saying a few words, and they were all from the Yang residence, Chichigu thought even more highly of second Yang's ability. He nodded and said, "All right, follow me. However, my home is a bit far from the city. I'm afraid it's a bit far." "It doesn't matter. We don't have any other abilities, but we're not afraid of being tired." Haha. Beta Persei patted his chest and said. Kikij did not lie. They walked for nearly 2 hours. He did not know how a girl like her walked from her house to the Yang mansion's entrance alone. When Kikij finally stopped in front of an extremely ordinary-looking door, Beta Persei knew that they had finally arrived. He could not help but curse in his heart, "It seems that I have to ride here next time. The distance is indeed a little too far." In fact, in the first city, people were not allowed to ride horses on the streets without special reasons. Firstly, it was easy to collide with people on horseback. Secondly, horses had horse dung, which would increase the difficulty of cleaning the clean streets in the city. But riding a bicycle was different. It was clean and fast. Of course, other than Beta Persei and the others, it would not be so easy for ordinary people to get a bicycle. When they finally arrived at the door of Kikij's house, Beta Persei's expression became much more solemn. He even tried to squeeze out more smiles on his face. He wanted to leave a good first impression. Chapter 756. There was no such thing as individual houses in the beginning city. They were all collectively owned, which meant that they all belonged to Yang Chendong. Everyone who came here was just renting a house. According to the rules, only those who had worked in the beginning city for more than 5 years were qualified to buy a house here. This caused the houses here to look the same from the outside. The so-called differences were only the various differences after entering the rooms. For example, the furnishings in the house, the decent items in the house, and so on. However, when Beta Persei followed Kikij into the house, he really did not see anything decent. It gave him a feeling of emptiness and then cleanliness. Cleanliness did not mean that there was nothing clean, but it meant that the house was wiped clean. From this, it could be seen that this family was very hardworking. When Kikij came back and brought some soldiers with him, Ba Dama and Ba Tu, who were cooking, were frightened. They stood up and stood there cautiously, not knowing what to do. After all, the mercenaries were usually seen patrolling the streets with a meticulous look. Suddenly coming into such close contact with them, it was more or less a little difficult for them to adapt. "Mother, brother, this is Beta Persei. He is from the Yang residence." "Brother Beta Persei, this is my mother, Ba Dama, and my brother, Ba Tuesday." Kikij stood between the two sides and introduced them to each other. "So it's auntie and brother. Hello, my name is Beta Persei." Beta Persei was very enthusiastic and generous. But this time, he did not reach out his hand, afraid that he would leave a bad impression on the other party. When she heard from her daughter that the person was from the Yang residence, the expression on Badama's face immediately became very nervous. "So it's a soldier from the Yang residence. Please take a seat in the house." Seeing Badama's nervousness, Beta Persei chuckled again and said, "Auntie, you can call me Beta Persei. You don't have to call me soldier." As he spoke, Beta Persei had already stepped into the house and saw a plate of mutton on the table. Although the portion was small, it looked crispy on the outside and tender on the inside. It seemed to be very delicious. This should be Kikij's lunch. Seeing Beta Persei staring at the mutton, Badama said with an unnatural expression, "Kikij was chosen by the publicity team. Our family is preparing to celebrate for her. If you want to try it, you can try it. Batu, why don't you add another knife disc? Oh. After Batu agreed, he turned around and walked to the kitchen. However, Beta Persei reached out to stop him. Is this how you celebrate? There should be something delicious left, right? Bring it all up. Of course, Beta Persei was not craving mutton. In fact, after coming to the grasslands, he had eaten mutton the most. However, eating the same thing every day for a long time would make anyone sick of it. The reason why Beta Persei said this was because he saw that this plate of mutton should be the only dish for Kikij's celebration. When he first entered the house, he smelled some potatoes. If he guessed correctly, there should be potato cubes in the pot, which could be regarded as a staple food in the house. Wanting to see the other dishes in front of everyone put Badama in a difficult position. However, she was older after all, and her skin was thicker. She shook her head and said, "This is the celebratory dish we prepared for Kikij. This is the one I borrowed from the neighbor. When Kikij receives his monthly salary, he will have to return it." Since he had already said everything, there was nothing left to hide. Thus, Badama revealed everything to him. Hearing this, Beta Persei's face did not show any surprise. He just had mixed feelings in his heart. This was the life of the Mongolian people. Those Khans still wanted to fight for territory and fought every day. The lives of the people were so difficult. Who would care? This was also because he had been with Yang Chendong for a long time and learned to be compassionate. However, Beta Persei was not the sixth young master. He quickly returned to reality. First, he glanced at Kikij, then his gaze fell on the door and shouted, "Biyao Jiang, come in." As soon as his voice fell, the door opened. Biyao Jiang, who was dressed in a military uniform, strode in. "Brother Beta Persei, what can I do for you?" "Send someone to the nearest restaurant and get 6 dishes and some good wine. Remember, be quick." Beta Persei's voice carried an unquestionable air of command. "Yes." 8 Dao Jiang Ili saluted and turned to carry out the orders. Kikij's family of 3 looked at him. In the end, Biyao said, "No need, we're used to eating this. It's fine if we eat this normally, but today is a day to celebrate Kikij. How can we just do it casually? Just get 6 dishes to show that everything is going well." Beta Persei looked as if he had made up his mind. Then, he did not dwell on this matter. Instead, his gaze fell on Tuesday. "I heard from your sister that your physical fitness is good, but you weren't selected because you're the only son?" Batu was still upset about the fact that he didn't enlist in the army. Suddenly, young heir asked him such a question, which made him see hope. He nodded and said, "Yes, I passed the physical fitness test and the equestrian test. My results were good. But when it came to my family, they said that I was the only son in the family and persuaded me to leave." Speaking of this, Batu still had an aggrieved look on his face full of indignation. "Yes." Beta Persei nodded. This was the same as what Kikij said. Seeing Beta Persei nod, Batu was full of hope. He thought that since this person was from the Yang residence and could order other soldiers at will, he should have some status. As long as he was willing to help, there should be no problem. While he was still thinking about this, Beta Persei had already spoken. The people in the recruitment office are right to do this. This is also the intention of the god of war. After all, people will die in war. He is actually thinking for you. Even Beta Persei said that this was the right thing to do. Batu, who had just seen hope, could not help but lower his head again. Didn't this mean that there was no hope for him to enlist in the army? Just when Batu lowered his head and Kikij and his mother's faces were also gloomy, Beta Persei suddenly spoke again, "There are exceptions. If you really want to rely on enlisting in the army to protect the first city and want to use this to make a name for yourself, this feeling is understandable and can be satisfied. But there is one thing, people may die in war. Are you afraid of death?" And Auntie, if Ba-tu dies gloriously on the battlefield, can you accept it? Things suddenly took a turn for the better, and Kikij's family of 3 could not help but feel their eyes light up. Next, Ba-tu spoke first. I can accept it. People will always die in war. If I die in war, it means that my skills are not as good as others. There is nothing to regret. Okay. What do you think, Auntie? Yang couldn't help but ask. Then, she turned her gaze towards Badama. As a mother, who would want to see her son get into trouble? Who would be willing to see her son die? However, Badama knew her son's ambition. She thought that people would die eventually, either vigorously or without life. She nodded heavily. Life and death are up to fate. I support my son. Then there's no problem. Hearing such an answer, Beta Persei said as if he was making a guarantee. Ah. There's no problem. Kikij, who was at the side, did not understand. What did this mean? Could it mean that Ba-tu could enlist in the army? Not only Kikij, but Ba-dama and Ba-tu also looked at Beta Persei with a puzzled expression. He had to add, how about this, I'll take Ba-tu to the recruitment office in a while. As long as he passes the previous physical fitness and equestrian assessment, then he can enter the barracks in the afternoon. But for the 1 to 3 months of recruit training, I'm afraid you won't be able to meet him. That's a closed training, so you have to be mentally prepared in this regard. It's okay, I can bear it. As if afraid that Beta Persei would go back on his word, Ba-tu hurriedly shouted. At this time, he could not wait to go to the barracks with Beta Persei immediately. As for whether he would eat or not, it did not matter. There's no hurry. The food will be delivered soon. We'll go after eating. Young heir chuckled. At this moment, Kikij also laughed. From time to time, her eyes would look at Beta Persei. Her expression was full of a different kind of feeling. Ba Daojiang was very fast. After a while, he returned with 6 dishes. 4 of them were meat, 2 were vegetables, and a large pot of white rice. Kikij did not know how long it had been since she had such a sumptuous lunch. With Beta Persei taking the lead, everyone ate until they were full. Then, when Kikij looked at Beta Persei, there was a trace of tenderness in her eyes. Cough, cough, cough. Suddenly, Ba-dama coughed out of the blue. It was followed by a long bout of non-stop coughing until his face turned red. Only then did he slowly recover. What's going on? Auntie has caught a cold. Didn't she go to the hospital in the city? Beta Persei noticed that neither Kikij nor Ba-tu showed any surprise at this moment. It was as if they were used to it. He suddenly felt that something was wrong and asked with concern. Yes, but the cost of the hospital is too high. We can't afford it. Kikij answered, but as she spoke, her voice became softer and softer. How can this be? If you're sick, you have to see a doctor. This can't be delayed. How about this, send Auntie to the hospital immediately. I'll pay for the cost. Beta Persei knew that his opportunity to perform had come again, so he said without hesitation. Chapter 757. How can we do that? We already owe you too much. Kikij's face turned red as she spoke. At that moment, she even thought of selling her body to save her mother. Why not? You and your brother are going to serve the mercenaries soon. You can return the money you earned to me in the future. Besides, you and Ba-tu are going to join the army, so Auntie will be considered a military family member. She will be taken care of in the hospital and the fees will be reduced a lot. Don't hesitate, this matter is settled. Beta Persei said in an unquestionable tone. At that moment, he had undoubtedly become a pillar of support for Kikij's family. After the meal, Beta Persei first accompanied Badama's family to the hospital. When young heir appeared here, even the director was shocked. Then, he found the best doctor. After seeing him, he concluded that it was only caused by the cold. There was nothing wrong with him. He just needed to stay in the hospital and take medicine to recuperate for a while. At that moment, Beta Persei asked for a room to be admitted to the hospital. Naturally, he was given the green light. Under the principle of special treatment, Badama was soon admitted to the hospital. Next, Beta Persei accompanied Batu to the recruitment office. Since he had shown up, the officers there naturally obeyed. Batu's name appeared on the recruits' roster and he was asked to arrange a place to live and receive the corresponding equipment. At this point, he had done what he had promised. Kikij, who had been following beside him, also found that her mother and brother were not around. She was alone with Beta Persei. Ba Daojiang and the others naturally kept a certain distance from the two of them. Seeing that there was no one around, Kikij's face turned even redder. Thank you for everything you've done for our family. Hey, it's nothing. Since you think so highly of the mercenaries, it's only right that we do something for you. Beta Persei said casually. But after saying this, his face turned a little red. He seemed to have thought of something but did not dare to say it out loud. What happened to you? Looking at Beta Persei's awkward appearance, Kikij asked curiously. He did not look as heroic as he did in the hospital and the recruitment office just now. Beta Persei, who was questioned by Kikij, blushed again, but in the end, he gritted his teeth and said as if he had made up his mind, can I visit you at the publicity office in the future? Kikij didn't expect it to be this question. For a moment, her face turned red like a ripe apple. If she still did not know what Beta Persei was thinking, she would be too stupid. Kikij did not answer. Beta Persei became a little anxious. I just want to see you. I won't disturb your work. I'll just look at you from afar, okay? Yes. After waiting for a long time, Kikij finally gave a response. Although it was only one word, it carried a lot of signals. It also caused Yang Air to be beaming with joy. He was extremely excited. When it was time for dinner, Beta Persei returned to the Yang residence in high spirits, but found that Yang Chendong had not eaten yet and was waiting for him. He hurried over. Young master, it's late. You should have dinner. I'm waiting for you. Let's eat together. Yang Chendong's voice was flat, but when he said that, Beta Persei felt that he had to obey. As Yang Xia continued to expand, although Yang Chendong was only a young man in his 20s, the aura of a superior was very strong. It was no exaggeration to say that he already had the aura of a superior without being angry. Even in the face of the beaming emperor, he would not be afraid. The meal was served. It was only 4 dishes and 1 soup. Beta Persei accompanied Yang Chendong for dinner. After the things were taken away, Yang Chendong looked at Beta Persei. Is there anything you want to say to me? Knowing that nothing could escape the 6th young master's eyes, Beta Persei did not intend to hide anything. He told him everything that happened today from beginning to end. When he finished, he said shyly, Young master, I like Kikij. I want to take her as my concubine. When he said that he wanted to take her as his concubine, Yang Chendong's originally calm expression showed a trace of appreciation. He had previously made a rule that the Cold Blade warriors and above could only marry Han women. No matter how good other women were, they could only be taken as concubines. For Beta Persei to say such words, it was obvious that he was following this rule. After knowing that Beta Persei had a sense of propriety, Yang Chendong had no intention of obstructing him. Instead, he nodded and said, Okay, you can do as you see fit. How about this? Tell me what you've seen and learned from Kikij's family. After knowing that Yang Chendong would not obstruct him and Kikij, Beta Persei also became energetic. He immediately said in detail, Young master, the Mongolian people are too poor. Not only do they not have enough to eat, but they also have no money to treat their illness. There should be many people like this in the beginning city. That's right, the people are too poor. How about this, pass down the order that all military families will have their rent reduced by half. In the future, they will be able to enjoy a 20% discount when buying rice and meat, and a 50% discount when treating illnesses. But you have to be careful that only one wife and one concubine of a mercenary warrior can enjoy this treatment. Those who marry several at once can forget about it. Yang Qindong could help others, but the premise was that others approved of him. If anyone who entered the beginning city could receive such treatment, not only would they need a lot of money as subsidies, but it would also be easy for others to take advantage of the loopholes. Being a mercenary was equivalent to facing life and death at any time. Such a sacrifice was worth a certain amount of return. On the contrary, those who just wanted to find a safe place to live and did not want to pay any price could forget about it. He was not a god who could guarantee that everyone would live a good life. Even if he was a savior, he would only save those who needed to be saved and those who worked hard and contributed. Hearing Yang Qindong's actions, Beta Persei solemnly saluted Yang Qindong. This was his gratitude to the sixth young master on behalf of the mercenary families. The next morning, Yang Qindong's new order was spread to the entire city. Instantly, the entire city was in an uproar. Regardless of whether it was those who signed up to join the army or those who wanted to join the publicity department, there were more and more people. After all, as a military family, they had such generous conditions, so it was impossible for them not to join the army even if they wanted to. This kind of spontaneous behavior quickly allowed the publicity department to find 200 good seedlings, filling up the 6,000 slots of the recruitment office. Even so, who knew how many people were still racking their brains to join the ranks of the military? However, rules were rules. In the end, Yumian stood up and said that if they wanted to join the army, they would have a chance in the future and would not accept them for the time being. If anyone gathered together and disturbed the order in the city, they would be arrested and disqualified from joining the army in the future. In special times, special methods were needed to govern the city. The beginning city became quiet again and was gradually shrouded by a heavy snow. Just as it seemed calm and many forces on the grassland were hiding for the winter, two pieces of news came from the security bureau. The director of the security bureau of the beginning city, Feng Liang, appeared in the Yang residence. Sitting in a warm room with a stove wall, Yang Qindong carefully read the two pieces of news and put them aside. "Tell me, how do you feel?" Knowing that the sixth young master was testing him, Feng Liang pondered for a moment, organized his words, and raised his head. Sixth young master, in this subordinate's opinion, these two matters should have nothing to do with each other. It's good that Biming has developed a new type of cannon, but the results have just come out. However, Zhang Quan and the others have been gone for some time. Judging from the time, they should not have received this news when they set off, so there is no connection, let alone any threat. I can only say that everything is just a coincidence. The two things that Feng Liang reported were that Biming had developed a new type of cannon and that the eunuch guarding the Datong residence, Zhang Quan, was already 20 miles away and would soon enter the beginning city. Ever since Yang Qindong defeated Yeshen of the Wara with the name of the god of war, Biming's imperial court saw the importance of firearms. They first tried their best to get a Type 81 gun and began to develop an imitation. However, without any guidance, they could only rely on the imitation and the progress was very slow. At least until now, they had not been able to create it. On the other hand, cannons were different. They knew that only an explosion could cause the greatest lethality after the cannon was fired, so they just had to find a way to do it. Originally, Biming had an artillery battalion, but the cannonballs fired by the artillery battalion were only large iron balls. Wherever they hit, they would leave a hole. The lethality of the cannonballs was too small, and only those standing in the front of the cannonballs would be threatened. However, after all, they had a certain foundation. After understanding the principle and investing a lot of manpower and energy, they finally received news that a new type of cannon had been developed. This news was sent by Yang Guang, who was in charge of the artillery battalion. During the Battle of the Capital, Yang Guang was Yang Qindong's subordinate. Later on, they became friends during the battle. He also listened to Yang Qindong's arrangements and went to the artillery battalion. After more than 3 years, this move finally played its role and news came. The news came, but it was not completely clear what the new cannon looked like. This was also why Yang Chendong was somewhat distressed. It was also at this time that another piece of news came. Baiming's Datong guard eunuch Zhang Quan was ordered by the emperor to come to Shi City and have a good talk with Yang Chendong. In summary, these two matters seemed to be related. It seemed that Baiming had a new type of cannon and had enough confidence, so they decided to have a good talk with this loyal duke. However, only Yang Chendong himself knew that they weren't close to each other. It was just a coincidence. Chapter 758. We still need to send someone to inquire about the new cannon. What exactly is it like? What are its functions and power? We have to find a way to find out. Although it's difficult, we'll try our best to do it. Yang Chendong gave the Security Bureau a direction for the first piece of news. Next, he talked about the second piece of news. When Zhang Quan arrives, arrange for Yu Mian to meet with them and discuss with them. Let's see if there are any regulations to report to me. It was true that Yu Mian was Yu Qian's son, but at that time, Yu Qian had disappeared. Baiming did not care about it. As his son, Yu Mian naturally did not need to work for Baiming. Based on this point, even Zhang Quan could not say anything. If he insisted on using this matter as an excuse, it could only be said that this person's IQ was too low. Yang Chendong had just made arrangements. That night, 1,000 Baiming guards arrived at the foot of the first city. They had already sent someone to report. When Zhang Quan and Captain Su Dei arrived at the foot of the city with the army, the city gate was already wide open. Many soldiers wearing large cotton-padded clothes with torches lined up on both sides of the road. Looking at their appearance, they were all in high spirits. When they looked at the Baiming army, their eyes lit up. They were like tigers that could open their bloody mouths at any time and eat people. Zhang Quan was not tall and his eyes were not big, but they were very spirited. They were like a pair of mouse eyes that kept flickering. It was obvious that this person was still somewhat clever. Captain Su, this is the territory of the Duke of Loyalty. You must instruct your soldiers not to cause trouble. Otherwise, no one can protect you. Looking at the formation at the city gate, Zhang Quan carefully said to Su Dei. At this moment, he was frightened by the situation. His legs were trembling and trembling. A eunuch was a eunuch after all. He relied on pleasing the emperor to obtain power. He had never been through the battlefield. How could he not be afraid in the face of the murderous aura of the mercenaries? This is the original Alikumaki? I only heard that it was pitifully small, but it doesn't look like it. Zhang Quan was extremely flustered. Firstly, the appearance of the mercenaries had frightened him. Secondly, he was shocked by the majestic city in front of him. At this moment, Su Dei was looking at the mercenaries standing outside the city. As a Jianghu, especially a Jianghu at the forefront of the front line, he was more professional than ordinary soldiers. Because of this, he could feel the valiant and murderous aura of the mercenaries. Hearing Zhang Quan's words, Su Dei nodded and said, "This place used to be pitifully small and abandoned for a long time. It seems like the loyal duke really put in a lot of effort here." Su Dei was different from other people. He started off as a corporal and worked his way up bit by bit. In the past, he had been to some places around the Great Ming Dynasty. Later, he was chosen by Commander Sun Hong and was promoted step by step to the position of Jianghu Guard. It was precisely because he had been to Arakumaki before that he was even more surprised than Zhang Quan when he suddenly saw the magnificent first city. If it weren't for the fact that the aura of these mercenaries was even more amazing, his attention would have been diverted to the city's buildings. The city gate opened, and there were still mercenaries walking out. After about half a cup of tea's time, when everything in sight was lit up by torches, a general wearing a black cloak rode out and stopped 3 meters in front of Zhang Quan and Su Dei. The warhorse was stopped by the reins, but the general didn't get off the horse, nor did he report his name. He just stared at Zhang Quan and Su Dei with a scrutinizing gaze. After a long time, he slowly spat out 3 words, "Enter the city." Suddenly being stared at, Zhang Quan felt a chill run down his spine. Even Su Dei, who was at the side, was tense all the time. He just had a feeling that if something really happened, even if he drew his sword, he wouldn't be the other party's opponent. The person who came could give him a great sense of oppression. After saying these 3 words, the general in the black cloak turned and left. He didn't even look at Zhang Quan and Su Dei. It was as if the other party was an insignificant character who didn't deserve his attention at all. With someone leading the way, although he didn't appear to be a very good friend, Zhang Quan and Su Dei had nowhere to go. At this time, they could only follow the other party's footsteps and walk into the first city. The city was also dark. After all, it was late. Under the guidance of the general in the black cloak, they turned left and right and came to the front of an inn. There were already people waiting here to arrange their food, clothing, and accommodation. The area of the inn was not small, and each room was also very big. However, there were more than 1,000 Ming soldiers. When these people swarmed in, it was still a little crowded. However, from the beginning to the end, no one stood out to say anything strange. It was probably because they also knew that this was not their territory and talking nonsense was likely to bring about an unexpected disaster. These more than 1,000 people stayed in the designated inn. Until they went to bed, no one came to see them or sent anyone with status to receive them. Only the waiters in the inn were busy. They were just a few waiters. What could they find out from their mouths? At this time, Zhang Quan couldn't help but feel a little regretful. He didn't expect the people here in the first city to be so strong. It seemed that this trip to seek cooperation wouldn't be too smooth. If he had known this, he might not have chosen to come. Yang Qindong naturally couldn't guess what Zhang Quan was thinking. He heard Tiger's Mane report all kinds of things about Zhang Quan and the others in the Yang residence. He couldn't help but smile. Who arranged for Yi La to go out of the city to welcome them? It seemed that the general in the black cloak was the commander of the Nuzan cavalry regiment, Yi La. No wonder the murderous aura was so strong that even Su Dei was scared. Young master, this is the joint idea of City Lord Yu Mian and I. We thought that the other party would come from afar, so we have to show them our strength first. Not understanding Yang Qindong's meaning, Tiger's Mane said tentatively. The 6th young master had previously said that he and Yu Mian would be in charge of the welcoming, but he hadn't expressed any attitude. Therefore, sending Yi La was also the idea of the 2 of them in order to intimidate the opponent. If they didn't strike the opponent's morale, they were afraid that some things wouldn't be easy to do next. Well, Yi La's murderous aura is strong. It should scare them so much that they won't be able to sleep well tonight. Yang Qindong still had a smile on his face. Obviously, he wasn't angry about Tiger's Mane and Yu Mian's choice. But in the end, he still said, I'm afraid that just being a deterrent is not enough. How about this, let them see the prosperity of the city tomorrow. One by one, is the way of civil and martial arts. Finally, there was a clear instruction. Tiger's Mane nodded repeatedly and said, Yes, young master. I'll make the arrangements now. That night, whether it was Zhang Quan or Su Dei, they didn't sleep well. Looking at the situation in the beginning city, they really couldn't guarantee that their heads wouldn't be cut off when they fell asleep. As it turned out, this worry was unnecessary. The next morning, they opened their eyes without any problems. At this time, the inn was extremely lively. The food had already been prepared and served in front of them. There were 4 dishes and 1 soup, and it was a standard that was sufficient. Not only did Zhang Quan and Su Dei, but even the Biming soldiers below exclaim in surprise. What time is this? Where is this place? It was cold outside, and this was an isolated city. It should be extremely difficult to transport supplies here. However, the food was still so good. Not only were there meat dishes like mutton and pork, but there were also vegetarian dishes like chives, spinach, and celery. The green color on the plate was shocking. Behind the Datong prefecture was the land of Biming. However, even in such a place, vegetables could only be seen for a few months in a year. In this season, most of the vegetables were potatoes, radishes, and cabbage. How could they eat such green food? This can't be the standard of food every day, right? Looking at the dishes on the table, Zhang Quan was surprised. Su Dei was also shocked by the reality in front of him. A voice sounded in his mind. This standard of food can't be continued. It's probably because I've just arrived and they're treating me well. Yes, that must be it. This breakfast was no less than the one that greeted them last night. It gave Zhang Quan, Su Dei, and the others a shock. Not long after breakfast, someone came to deliver a message saying that City Lord Yu Mian was dealing with government affairs and did not have time to see them. He asked Zhang Quan and the others to walk around the city. But at the same time, he also made a request, and that was to not invite too many people on this trip, let alone gather together. Otherwise, if something went wrong, both sides would lose face. After sending away the messenger, Zhang Quan muttered to himself for a moment before looking at Su Dei and saying, "Thousand Commander Su, since they're letting us look around without any defenses, we'll do as they wish. Let's arrange for the soldiers below to be led by a sergeant to walk around the city. At night, they'll report to us what they see. Remember to remind them not to make trouble out of nothing. Otherwise, no one can protect them." When he said the last sentence, Zhang Quan's expression was much more serious. When Su Dei heard this, he nodded and went to make arrangements. Hundreds of small groups led by the Ming army squad leaders left the inn and started to move through the city according to the directions they had divided. Zhang Quan and Su Dei didn't stay idle either. They also brought a few attendants to the main street of the first city. They went to the commercial street that the innkeeper had mentioned. The commercial street was something that Yang Chendong must build in every city that belonged to him. By gathering all the businesses in one place, not only could it be better managed, but it could also attract people's attention. Whether it was merchants or ordinary people, they could buy things better. Chapter 759. Based on agriculture, industry, commerce, and light industry. This was the way Yang Chendong chose to develop the economy. Vast land and abundant resources were naturally a characteristic of the Central Plains. However, don't forget that there was a large population behind it. If one wanted to support so many people, just collecting taxes from the land would not solve the fundamental problem. On the contrary, it would increase the burden of the people. Therefore, from the beginning, Yang Chendong only collected a small amount of land tax symbolically. Instead, he focused on commercial development. Merchants were engaged in trade. They played the game of buying at a low price and selling at a high price. Relatively speaking, they were considered as mental workers. Such people not only contributed less, but they also earned more. Compared to the farmers who faced the yellow soil with their backs facing the sky, the investment and harvest of both sides were completely not proportional. This ratio may not be seen in a short period of time. However, as time passed, the contradictions would inevitably begin to deepen. Once the gap between the rich and the poor was widened, all kinds of problems would emerge one after another. Facts also proved that when every dynasty was first established, the social order was very good. However, as it continued to develop, there were more and more unfair things. In the end, society became more and more chaotic until one day, when it could no longer be suppressed, it was replaced by a new dynasty. In order to avoid income inequality and too big of a gap, Yang Chendong adopted a heavy tax on businesses and a small land tax on farmers. Although this could not completely avoid the existence of the gap, at least it was controlled to a relatively acceptable level. Only by walking on two legs could society develop normally and continuously improve. Naturally, while imposing heavy taxes, Yang Chendong also gave a certain amount of respect to businesses. Just like in terms of social status, they were constantly being raised. This was contrary to the national policy of the Great Ming Dynasty. In the Great Ming Dynasty, the status of merchants was so low that it was even lower than the ordinary people. In the eyes of others, they were people who reaped without sowing. They were unscrupulous people who talked about money and were disgraced by others. However, in the territory controlled by Yangxia, merchants were quite respected because they paid a heavy tax to society. This was equivalent to making a great contribution. With the rise in status, more and more businessmen were willing to come to Yangxia's territory to develop their businesses. As a matter of fact, they earned quite a bit. After all, the goods produced by Crimson City were so novel, high quality, and few in number. It could be said that the demand exceeded the supply. It could be said that in the environment at that time, as long as one had the means to obtain the goods produced in Crimson City, one would not have to worry about selling them. The only difference was how high the price of the goods could be. If it had to be summed up in 8 words, it would be that there was no highest, only higher. Business was so profitable that it had become an important cornerstone of Yangxia's development. Even so, how could Yang Chendong let go of such a good opportunity so easily? At the beginning of the construction of the first city, he had planned out a commercial street. He waited for the cement and steel bars to arrive from the Crimson City by sea to begin construction. Then, a large number of goods began to fill this street, causing it to quickly become prosperous and lively. This was exactly what Zhang Quan and Su Dei saw. They were surprised to find that even though it was snowing heavily outside, it was still very cold. But in the commercial street, it was indeed a bustling scene. People were squeezing and huddling together. From afar, it was as bustling as the center of the capital. If there had to be a difference, it would be that the clothes of the people here were very different from those in the capital of Baiming. Here, they could see merchants wearing all kinds of strange clothes. Most of them were Mongolian merchants, and there might be merchants from further regions and countries. But what surprised Zhang Quan was that he also saw merchants from the Great Ming Dynasty here. Why would merchants from the Great Ming Dynasty appear in the grassland? Could it be that they had secretly joined the Mongolian tribe? With such doubts, Zhang Quan personally walked up to a merchant who was wearing the same clothes as the people of the Great Ming Dynasty. They seemed to be chatting, but at the same time, they seemed to be asking something. The merchant did not know Zhang Quan's true identity. He only felt that this person gave him a feminine feeling. But the other party spoke the language of the Great Ming Dynasty, and this could not be fake. Moreover, the other party's clothes were the same as his. Since they were both from the Great Ming Dynasty, the merchant had a natural sense of closeness. Under Zhang Quan's intention, the two sides quickly chatted, and the conversation was very congenial. After nearly half an hour, Zhang Quan returned to Su Dei's side, but his expression was somewhat ugly. "Eunuch Zhang, what's going on? Why is there a merchant from the Great Ming Dynasty here?" Su Dei had been curious for a long time, and finally had the opportunity to ask. "He is indeed a merchant from the Great Ming Dynasty, and he is from our Baiming." Zhang Quan's status was naturally higher than Su Dei's, but considering that he still needed the other party to ensure his safety this time, he did not hide anything. He did not join the Mongolian tribe, nor did he join the Duke of Zhongdan. He is buying goods here because he wants to sell them back to our Baiming. Ah. Buying goods from the grassland and selling them back to Baiming? This can take more than 20 days? Hearing this answer, Su Dei was also shocked and said with a puzzled expression. "But our Baiming no longer has any goods. Or rather, we have goods, but they are controlled by those aristocratic families and important ministers in the imperial court. Small merchants like this have no share at all." They also heard about what happened in the beginning city, and they also heard that as long as they have money, they can get the goods here. Moreover, as real Han people, they can get a 5% discount when they get the goods. Driven by benefits, they will come even if they are far away. Zhang Quan said this expressionlessly, but in fact, his heart was bleeding. Speaking of which, Zhang Quan was able to become the eunuch guarding the Datong prefecture, and he also had a backer in the palace. Even his name was in the heart of the Daizong Zhu Qiyu, and he could be considered to be in the privileged class. However, he was also in the privileged class, and he still had to be divided into factions. He was very pessimistic about some of the influential people in the capital. Some people only relied on the power in their hands to do some things that took advantage of others. Once there was a problem, they might not have the ability to solve the problem. Even so, these people who did not have much ability and only knew how to play tricks had a prosperous career. Some of them even received the favor of the emperor, which made Zhang Quan even more furious. With this understanding and now hearing this merchant's words, it was no wonder that his expression became very bad. Zhang Quan saw something deeper, which was the decay and decline of the great Ming dynasty. Although it was a small matter, it did give him a different feeling. Here, all he saw was prosperity, youthfulness, and hope. Su Dei was only a Jianghu. Perhaps he could not think of so many things, but he also knew that in the long run, the influence of the beginning city would grow bigger and bigger. One day, it would have the power to replace the great Ming dynasty. While the two of them were still lamenting in their hearts, a mercenary soldier in military green suddenly came. "My lords, our city lord invites you." Was he finally going to see the city lord? Zhang Quan nodded to Su Dei and then said, "Please lead the way." This journey was very far, and they were 5 miles away from the city. Fortunately, horses had been prepared here, and the road had been completely cleared to ensure that they could travel unimpeded. Even so, after driving for nearly half an hour, they arrived at their destination. They came to a vegetable greenhouse area covered with plastic films. The soldier who led the way took out a special token that emitted a silver light from his body. No one stopped them all the way. When they finally arrived in front of a large shed area, he got off his horse, pointed to a large shed area, and said, "My lords, our city lord is inside. Please." Zhang Quan and Su Dei got off their horses and did not bring any entourage. In fact, not everyone could enter this shed. The two of them followed the soldier into the shed, and the first feeling they had was warmth. Compared to the cold weather outside, not only was the air here fresher, but the climate was also very pleasant, giving people the feeling that the 4 seasons were like spring. What greeted their eyes was not a white expanse, but was completely replaced by green. At this moment, Yu Mian, who was in front of a cucumber rack, turned his head with a smile on his face. He greeted them warmly, "Eunuch Zhang, Jianghu Su, you're here." Before they came, they knew that the city lord of the beginning city was called Yu Mian. He was the eldest son of Yu Qian, the assistant minister of the Ministry of War. For this matter, the embroidered uniform guards and the East faction guards had also made a report to the imperial court. The general idea was that they suspected that Yu Qian's disappearance had a lot to do with the mercenaries. However, everything was just a guess. Without any evidence, this matter was still unknown in the end. Now that he finally saw Yu Mian, the first thing Zhang Quan said was, "How is City Lord Yu? But I wonder if Assistant Minister Yu is doing well?" In the face of this obvious test, Yu Mian chuckled and replied politely, "My father is doing well. Thank you for your concern, Eunuch Zhang. Oh right, it's your first time here. How do you feel about our shed area?" He did not say much about Yu Qian's matter. This was also the result of Yu Mian asking Yang Qindong for advice. He knew that since Baiming had sent people here this time, they would definitely be interested in his identity. Naturally, they would not be able to avoid his father. When he asked about Yang Qindong, the answer he received was, half hidden, half revealed. After fully understanding this sentence, Yu Mian knew that even if he wanted to say that his father was still alive, he could not tell them what he had done. Thus, he came up with this answer. Yu Mian took the initiative to change the topic, and Zhang Quan sighed in his heart. He knew that this question would end here. Not to mention whether it would cause trouble for him if he asked, he was afraid that the other party would not answer him even if he asked. Chapter 760. Fortunately, Zhang Quan was a smart person. He knew what could be said more and what could not be said at all. Therefore, he went along with the flow and said that the greenhouse was very good. It was really a cheerful thing to be able to see these fresh vegetables in the cold winter. After a round of praises, Zhang Quan asked casually, "City Lord Yu, may I know how much space these greenhouses will take up?" Not much, only 2,000 mu. Yumian stroked his beard that had not grown long ago and sighed. To be honest, 2,000 mu was not considered small. This was even because of Yang Chendong's suggestion. When he first heard that they were going to grow vegetables in winter, Yumian only thought of 100 mu. That way, even if there were any accidents, there would not be any problems. In the end, it was Yang Chendong who spoke. Considering that the shed tubes and plastic films transported from Qian City could only make 2,000 mu, he decided on this number. Now, it seemed that they had planted too little. If they had known that there would be such a good result, they would not have found it too much even if they doubled it. Just like now, these vegetables had matured. Whether it was transported to the military camp or sold in the market, they were all very popular items. The high price had already allowed them to recover their initial investment. If they sold all of them, just this alone would bring a lot of benefits and income to the first city. Especially when Yang Chendong made a move again and came up with such a good thing like a vacuum bag. Once the vegetables were placed in it, it could guarantee that the quality of the vegetables would not be damaged for a certain period of time. This could allow them to be transported to further places. Of course, after being equipped with a vacuum bag, the price of the vegetables was not ordinary. Often, only the leaders of some nearby Mongolian tribes could afford to eat them. However, at that time, this was already considered a miracle. After all, although the vacuum bag was not valuable, it was indeed something that no one else could produce except for the factories in Qian City. When Zhang Quan heard that one of them was 2,000 mu, he could not help but sigh. The Duke of Loyal and Bold is really generous. Huh, come on. Since we're here, I'll show you around. Then, you'll personally pick the ripe vegetables. We'll choose to have lunch here. Yumian seemed to be in a good mood and greeted them warmly. Zhang Quan and Su Dei each had a basket of vegetables in their hands. Although the two of them didn't have high positions, they hadn't personally picked vegetables for a long time. It was a fresh experience for them, and the greenhouse was filled with cheers and laughter. At noon, the vegetables they picked were placed on the table. With the chef's help, some pork was added. In the end, the three of them ate until they were full. During the meal, the guests and the host enjoyed themselves to the fullest, but after the meal, the atmosphere quickly cooled down. Because they all knew that it was time for negotiation, and it was time for them to state their conditions. There was a war of words going on in the tent area. In the Yang mansion in the beginning city, Yang Chendong was standing in front of the sand table and looking at it carefully. He had been standing here since lunch, and it had been nearly an hour since he finished his lunch. What is the sixth young master doing? Qiu Vi, the captain of the first guard on duty, finally couldn't help but ask when he saw Yang Chendong standing there for a long time without moving. To become a member of the guard, loyalty was essential, not to mention physical fitness, but the most important thing was that they had to keep their mouths shut. Often by the sixth young master's side, it was inevitable that they would come into contact with some confidential matters. They had to know what could be said and what could not be said. Even the ordinary members knew about this, not to mention Cho Wu, who was the captain. However, he still asked. It was probably because there was only young air in front of him. Moreover, he was indeed curious about this matter. I don't know. Beta Persei shook his head. Obviously, he couldn't see what the young master was doing. However, his intuition told him that the young master must have thought of something again. Perhaps something big would happen soon. Beta Persei was indeed someone who had been by Yang Chendong's side for many years. This time, he guessed correctly. After some time, Yang Chendong finally moved his body and said to Beta Persei, "Go and call Su Yunsheng over." Su Yunsheng, the commander of the reconnaissance battalion. Although his rank was not very high, he was someone whom Yang Chendong trusted very much. After being found by the guards, he immediately rushed to the Yang mansion and came to the hall. Take a good look at this place. I want to know the details of his situation. Go and do it. Yang Chendong pointed to a place called Talos City on the sand table and ordered Su Yunsheng. Su Yunsheng left. Since it was an order from the sixth young master, he naturally didn't dare to be careless. He immediately sent the most elite force of the reconnaissance battalion to investigate Tala's city. Not long after he left the Yang mansion, City Lord Yu Mian rushed over to report on his work. "Sixth young master, we had a preliminary meeting, but the results weren't very satisfactory." "Well, since it's a negotiation, naturally there won't be a result so soon. It's just that we can't wait any longer. How about this? Go and find them again tomorrow and tell them that we'll only give them 3 days. If they can't reach an agreement, then they can go back to where they came from." Yang Qindong spoke as if he had seen through everything. 3 days? Hearing this answer, Yu Mian was stunned. This time requirement was a bit too tight. Of course, he was more worried that with only 3 days, it would be difficult to reach an agreement. Yang Qindong seemed to see through his worries and chuckled. "Don't worry, go and talk. They should have a change tonight." In the inn, it was already dark. All the Biming soldiers began to return to their teams. Then, all kinds of reports were continuously reported. The Biming soldiers were not like the cold front warriors. All of them were capable in both civil and military matters. Many of them were illiterate. The so-called reports were mostly verbal reports. Zhang Quan and Su Dei listened to them talk about what they had seen in the city in the largest room in the inn. However, after only meeting a dozen Dakarches, Zhang Quan waved his hand in annoyance. "All right, tell them that there's no need to report anymore. I think they've seen the same thing." Zhang Quan was annoyed because all the Biming soldiers who came to report were talking about the benefits of the beginning city. For example, the prosperity of this place. For example, the treatment of the soldiers here was good, the food was good, and the equipment was complete. For example, the people here were full of vitality. The people here didn't scold the army and only praised them. According to what these soldiers said, the beginning city was close to becoming a perfect city. Those who could live in this city, whether it was the soldiers or the people, were the happiest people in the world. In that case, what was the Datong mansion? What was the Biming mansion? What was the Biming capital? It was no wonder that Zhang Quan was so angry that he sent all of them away. Although he had long seen that the beginning city was extraordinary, now that everyone said this, it was still a little beyond his expectations. He was even wondering if it was right to let them out during the day. If this continued, the morale of the army would be affected. "Eunuch Zhang, I think it's better to let them stay in the inn tomorrow." Su Dei also saw the hidden danger and carefully reminded him. "I think it's okay." Zhang Quan glanced at Su Dei. He knew that the other party had the same worries and concerns as him, so he nodded. If this went on, he was really worried that the soldiers he brought would fall in love with this place and become deserters. If that happened, it would really be a huge loss of face. At this moment, Zhang Quan finally knew why the mercenaries allowed him to bring all the soldiers into the city instead of arranging a residence for them outside the city. As a result, no one stopped these soldiers from watching the show in the city. He thought about how he whimsically released all the soldiers in order to find out where the loopholes in the city were. He even had the opportunity to let them come into contact with the mercenaries and see if he could persuade them to work for him. But now, his soldiers had almost rebelled. Now that he thought about it, he had really shot himself in the foot. The beginning city had this kind of attraction. The more you knew, the easier it was to be roped in by them. In view of this, Zhang Quan and Su Dei came to the same conclusion. Tomorrow, they would imprison the soldiers and not allow them to walk on the streets freely. Early the next morning, the order was issued and immediately caused many soldiers to be unhappy. Many of them had heard yesterday that the mercenaries' publicity team would have a program today, and it was said that it would be very interesting. This was very tempting for the Biming soldiers who had been guarding the border. Among them, Nie Jingyi was the one who shouted the loudest. Nie Jingyi was 25 years old. He was only 3 years older than Yang Qindong, but he was already a centurion. Like many soldiers guarding the border, Nie Jingyi was born in a military family. This meant that he was destined to only be a soldier in his life. He had no other choice. Fortunately, although he was born in the same family, he seemed to like to join the army. He was the king of children since he was young. When he grew up, he also had a burly figure. After joining the army, he did not make it in time for the Battle of Tumu Fort. However, when Yes Hen led the Walla soldiers into the Hetao area and even wanted to invade Datong, he did participate in the battle. In that battle, he killed 4 enemies and captured 1 alive. He was forcefully promoted from the position of a squad leader to a centurion. It was precisely because of his military exploits that he had obtained everything he had that he was highly respected among the soldiers. At least in the centurion he led, everyone was willing to listen to him. Yesterday, he also heard from the people in the city that the publicity team would perform a program tomorrow. He also heard from the people that the actors in the publicity team were all young and beautiful. They had good figures and the performance was also very good. As the saying went, which young girl did not yearn for love and which man did not fall in love with women? You're tuning into the Biyao's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.